Meeting of the Zoning and Planning Commission to order. Welcome, everybody. We've already said our Pledge of Allegiance. Do we have to get up and do it again?
No, you don't.
Good. Okay, thank you.
I don't even do that.
All right, so George, is, there's a few from zoning. I mean, is this gonna be it, or are we expecting,
It's
oh, Jackie?
totally unnecessary.
I only heard from Alan,
I promise I will.
so
I do.
I think this is probably
Okay.
maybe one more.
We can go ahead.
Okay.
We're fine.
All right,
So I'll just introduce and we'll go, right?
okay, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a joint meeting between these two bodies. You know that we're in the middle of, or not in the middle of, maybe 30% into the zoning regulation update, which is a huge project on the plate of the zoning commission. And we thought it appropriate at a couple of junctures throughout this, more than year-long process that the planning commission, of course, ought to be included and briefed, because it will be ultimately your job to provide a full recommendation, just like you would do for any text amendment. It just happens to be a 187-page text amendment, give or take. So we have with us tonight Francisco Gomes from IMEG. He's sitting right up front. He is our project manager from the firm, I just said IMEG, from IMEG. And he is him and his firm are extremely experienced in this zoning world of writing and rewriting and helping communities update their zoning regulations. Tony, do you want to say anything?
Nope, I think we're ready to go.
I'd turn it over to Francisco. And
Okay, yeah, thanks, George, for the introduction. It's good to be.
Could you sit a little more center than we
A
could
little more
all?
center,
we
as
could-
long as I'm not, oh, you can
Oh,
see over the top.
I can see over you,
You
it's
can
just,
see
I
o-
can't
so that's
see
fine.
you.
So that's fine, okay. I'm trying not to be the full show here. It's very good to be with all of you this evening. And obviously a lot of familiar faces here because we've been working with the zoning commission for a little while now. And I think the chances are we may or may not have had some planning commissioner members in attendance of the workshop we did at the very end of March. Good, yeah, because I'm seeing familiar faces. So I think you generally understand what we're doing. And as George mentioned, we're roughly a third of the way into this process. This is technically our 25% progress meeting, but we've been making very good progress. So what I'd like to do this evening, and this is really going to test my memory to speak the slides that are behind me.
you got a copy right in front of you, and a hard copy.
Yeah, we want that.
Yeah, no, I can, it's George, although it's not advancing, maybe the power's on.
You got to point it at me.
Kevin's on.
Oh.
There's a call in, you can call it.
It's a PDF, it's not a slide.
No, it should work. It should work.
Yeah, it should advance regardless.
That's how that works.
Hang on. Give me that. It worked when I set it up. An hour
Maybe
ago.
it's a little, press the buttons right. Maybe it's a little outside its range. And I do carry my own, should we? Is it clicked on the window?
George,
It's probably that pop-up window below the Shannon screen that is keeping it from going. It probably wants to
I
do
don't know how I
something.
move, Shannon.
just click on it.
There you go.
Yeah, so that thing right
Get
there.
Shannon.
Ah,
Menacing.
there we go. All right, you're
It was
good.
all Shannon's fault.
Fred,
Shannon.
sounds like
Oh,
Shannon.
no, it's
Money
never
already
Shannon's
tonight.
fault.
He's
Shannon.
Also a tech guru.
Okay, thank you. Should be smooth as silk after this. So we'll go to our agenda. So I'd like to start with a debrief on the workshop. We won't take a lot of time, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page as to what we walked away from understanding based upon that workshop. There's a lot of work that went into it and a lot of great feedback that we received. So I'd like to let you know how we've interpreted that feedback. And if you have a different perspective, just based upon your knowledge of the issues or your attendance of the workshop, this is an opportunity to hear from you all. Following that, I'd like to talk about our ongoing work, which we've already prepared a first draft of the regulations as a whole, and there's much more work to do, but we've got it into its new organization and format, and so that's very important. That's the beginning. Then I'd really like to talk about the work that remains and some opportunities based upon discussions that came up at the workshop, items that staff have flagged, and things you could do because your zoning regulations don't fully address a number of topics. I'd also like to talk about Public Act 25-1, zoning-related components of which become effective July 1st of this year. And I'll talk about the implications of that, what we may need to do, what we will have to do with your zoning regulations to respond to that. And then I'd just like to go over a project schedule, show you where we stand, and talk about next steps, what comes next. Okay? All right. So, and I'll go here too, so I'm not constantly looking back. Okay. So the workshop, we had some pretty phenomenal attendance. We were very pleased with the turnout. And, for the benefit of anyone that did not have an opportunity to attend, it was about a 2-hour event at Simsbury Public Library. It started with a presentation that provided a brief overview on the purpose of the project and the scope of the project. We did an interactive survey with folks. We got some really interesting feedback on that. And then the central part of it was the last hour or so was we had breakout sessions, and we had some great conversations surrounding those. So I'd like to go through some of the highlights of those sessions. And I realize now, even though I clicked the slide, it had not advanced. That's the slide I was talking about right there. Interactive survey results. So I just pulled out some highlights. We had several slides, and so there's a lot of information, but I pulled out just some key highlights. First of all, the folks attending were very invested in the community, right? Almost 70% had lived in Simsbury for more than 20 years. And about the same amount, about 70% were either somewhat or very familiar with the town zoning regulations. So we had a really informed group that know the community quite well. Furthermore, when we asked some more pointed questions, kind of bigger picture questions, for example, we asked to select the statement that best represents your thoughts about Simsbury, and the options included, I like it as it is now, open for significant growth and change. And 57% of people, more than half of people, said they think Simsbury needs to continue to grow and change, but incrementally. Right, and that's not uncommon in the places we work. People are receptive to change, but they tend to be incrementalist in their approach. We also asked more specifically about land use and development, and more than a third responded that land use and the regulation of development is good in some areas, but not others. And that was kind of a theme throughout the night. Like they felt like the control over land use and development is working pretty well in some areas of town and not others, and that was probably the most common theme. And of course, the responses were all over the place, but that was the response that that had the highest percentage of results. When we went to the breakout sessions, and we did breakout sessions, we did a session on residential zones and housing, commercial and industrial zones and uses, sustainability and environmental protection, site parking and landscaping, signs and outdoor lighting. And we had one called new ideas. So if your idea didn't fit one of these boxes, let's talk about it. And we got tremendous feedback, and starting with residential zones and housing. I'm not going to read all of these verbatim. I wanted to provide them to you in advance of the meeting so that if you had any questions, I'm happy to dive into it, and that way following the meeting you've got it to refer to.
Francisco, I got a question.
Yes,
Did
please.
anyone respond that they wanted large apartment buildings?
No.
Didn't.
That wasn't an option.
No, the
Surprise.
well,
I don't think we asked the question that way, Mr. Wright.
So the
Why not?
I think we asked it.
So the breakout discussions, we had some prompt questions to get the conversation started, but they were open-ended conversations. So it wasn't a multiple choice type
Well,
discussion.
then I would deduce from
Yeah.
the responses to open-ended questions, of which there were none for large apartment buildings,
Yeah,
I would conclude that people don't want large apartment buildings.
I wouldn't conclude that.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
either based on the way the questions, it wasn't that,
right,
I
So it's
mean,
open-ended, what kind do you want?
no, but
yeah.
well, you would have
Well,
had to.
I wouldn't
get the
conclude that from
feedback.
the workshop,
was a-
but if
yeah,
you
it
talk to the
was
amount of people who are cost
It was
us
Yes, no.
Fitzgerald's, I would say they don't like it.
Yeah,
So I think that
I get
you-
accosted by
so
that
you're
all the
pointing
time.
right to like one of the key issues,
Mhm.
right? And I think context is everything, right? A large apartment building, well, where? And what does it look like? And, you know, on what site? And, you know, there's so many conditions there. I think generally speaking, most people would be very apprehensive if you put that out there. Like, do you like large apartment buildings? And I think it's very rare that you would find someone that says, yeah, put them wherever in Simsbury. We need more of that type of housing.
But look at
Read
the
the
third
bottom
It says it up there and halfway down, more townhouses, multifamily homes, mixed-use residential units
Right.
are needed. So I don't know where that specifically came from, if that
Yeah.
wasn't
So
or down below, you
the
know.
conversation was around a more diverse housing stock.
Well, and these bullet points for people who weren't there came
Yeah.
out of conversations that happened in groups of 5 or 10
Yeah.
at the little whiteboards for
Right.
15 minutes at a time or whatever it was. So this is the team at this group summarizing those conversations. The numerical surveys where everybody got a little pager and you got to answer 1 through 5 of whichever the responses were. These are summation of conversation.
Correct.
So there could be
And
one person or two people saying that in that group
Anecdotal.
during that
generally,
rotation.
generally speaking, in these slides, we were trying to identify the themes. So if just one person said that, we didn't list them here. I mean, we've got a full list of everything that was said.
Yeah, I mean, for example, there was one
What-
person that insisted we didn't cut down another single tree,
Yeah.
and that didn't make the slide, so, I mean.
We were trying to identify themes. Something that came up, we did 3 sessions, so people had an opportunity to rotate a couple times. So this particular, well, any of these groups, including this one, had 3 different combinations of people at those groups discussing. And we were looking for themes across those discussions to ensure that we weren't, letting one voice kind of dictate or dominate the perspective.
To your point, Bill, like when you start looking at multiple of those bullets, it's neighborhood, preserve,
Yeah,
small
right.
homes, starter homes, affordable, single family, multifamily, mixed use residential units. So there's not
Right, people
a
Large.
wide scale demand for more luminaries or whatever. Hartford South, yeah.
Mercy Crossing,
Yeah, there could be a demand not from Simsbury people,
exactly
but from
that.
people
Yes,
Correct.
out of town
yep,
who wanna move here.
There's certainly market demand for it.
yeah, I was gonna say the same thing,
Yes.
yeah.
There was nobody in
Fair.
those discussions that said they wanted a car wash, I'll tell you that.
One thing that maybe
Wasn't asked.
Francisco didn't say that,
No, he's not.
he asked a series of questions where 50+ people responded.
Right.
That data is available and it's probably in your Dropbox, the answer to each and every one of those questions. So, I would encourage everybody to go through and see that cross-section. Our takeaway was that it was fairly mixed, that there were folks who said, yeah, we should have more housing in certain places if it's right and it's the right density and all those kinds of things. And there were also folks who said,
That's all lip service, George.
I don't know, no, I mean, it was here,
I
like,
don't
you
think-
can
Bill,
see a
let me
lot of,
respond to
you
that.
get a
Let me
lot
say.
of them here and people were clicking their little clickers, like I was there,
we have data
but
where
it's,
folks responded to those questions.
but it's
And
vague.
so that data is real,
Yeah,
that's all. That's all.
But it wasn't a vision of what somebody would want to support what they're saying. There wasn't like, it was vague, like, do you wanna see more of this or less of this or the same of this? That's the kind of questions that were being asked and people were clicking in.
Well, I'd like to talk a
It
little
wasn't
more
clear.
generally about the purpose of that workshop and how we use that information. And we do have a full workshop summary that, as Georgia mentioned, should be available to you, that document. And it goes into way more detail and depth than we provided in this presentation, because this is really just for this evening's purposes. the purpose of that workshop, it's really to give people that are really concerned about these issues a forum, right? So we can hear them out. And, we can only hear from the people that turn out. And we understand that everywhere we go, right? We'll have a very passionate group of people, and maybe they are fairly representative of the perspectives in the community, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're representative of one perspective. I think based upon that, and I led the housing and residential discussion. Based upon that discussion, I was definitely hearing a lot of different perspectives. I was hearing from folks that were very in support of more housing development, and different types of housing, and more flexibility in the type of housing that are permitted, and making it easier to allow accessory apartments or whatever it may be. And then I was also hearing from folks that said, to your point earlier, that the problem is if we build new housing, this type of housing, it'll likely just get taken up by people moving from out of town to Simsbury. So even if our goal is to provide housing for our young families and for kids who grow up here and for seniors who want to downsize, the concern or the threat is that it's just going to end up being occupied by people moving from out of Simsbury and competing with folks that grew up here. And that's a very legitimate concern. And then we also heard from people that are very concerned about their neighborhoods and don't want large-scale development encroaching onto their neighborhoods, whether in their neighborhoods or even abutting their neighborhoods for that matter. So we did hear a diversity of perspectives. Now, as to what do we do with all this information? Well, it certainly guides us in our work, because our conversation tonight is going to be more information to help guide us. But we're getting to the point with the zoning regulation update where we're getting beyond just fixing things and better organizing them and making them more usable. Getting to the point where we actually need to start making some policy decisions about land use regarding all aspects of your zoning, whether it's your residential zones and the regulation of multifamily or townhouse or accessory apartments, your commercial zones, your parking regulations, sign regulations, you've got new lighting standards, but your flood hazard regulations. There's still some work involved in just cleaning those up and getting them up to date, making sure they're perfectly compliant and legally resilient. But we've also, as we're doing that work, we have an opportunity to think about how to do things differently, if things should be different or could be different, or respond to some of the direction provided by your plan of conservation and development. And so this information gathering gives us a sense as to whether or not people would be firmly behind making some big changes, generally oppositional to that, cautious in their approach, and then we take that information and with both the zoning and the planning commissions, we try to make some decisions about how to proceed. And of course, staff acts as a sounding board for us and a guide, because they know these issues very well. So we're not going to be making decisions based upon that workshop alone, or those breakout sessions alone, or the interactive survey alone. That's the information we're bringing to the table to help make decisions in this room and with the commissions. Which is why I wanted to start with these issues tonight, just to make sure we understand, I understand these issues as you understand them. That's what it comes down to. Okay. So on the topic of residential zones and housing, again, as I said, there's a concern about kind of the preservation of character, of the town's character, of neighborhoods, about not outgrowing the infrastructure you have, whether it be roads, sewer, water, but at the same time, a desire for different forms of housing that's more affordable to people, not necessarily affordable, although there are some proponents for housing that is reserved as affordable, but generally speaking, housing that is affordable to people. Workforce housing that came up, a number of people identified are teachers, a police or firemen, a town staff, whoever it may be, that they should be able to afford to live here, or it should be more affordable to them. So that's kind of the general themes that emerged. Are there any other thoughts regarding residential zoning or housing? And of course, housing's not limited to your residential zones. You allow housing in the Simsbury Town Center and in some of those other zones. Yes,
well-
there and there.
Go ahead, sorry.
I find it helpful if you have a map that shows where all the zones are and the density in relation to access to public water or sewer, which allows for the density.
Yeah.
And whether we're at capacity now for any of the infrastructure or sewer, because I remember years ago, there was a proposal to develop all those tobacco fields. And they wanted to switch sewer allocation further inland from near Hop Meadow. And the answer to that by the sewer commission was no. Keep it along the main corridor so that you could have more commercial. But unfortunately, we don't attract that much commercial other than a new car wash. And we're getting a new bank building where there was a fire that tore down a building. So we have to be aware of what the market is, but what our infrastructure. So I'm a visual kind of person. I love seeing like, oh, here's where this is allowed, and here's where that's allowed, in conjunction with discussion about it.
Understood. Your plan of conservation and development lays some of that groundwork, and that's really the role of the plan, is to explore those issues.
Yep.
I mean, that's the first place we start, and we did at the beginning of this work, we reviewed your POCD for its recommendations. And, it's, that plan was done, a few years ago. So we likely need to revisit some of those issues and see where things stand. Certainly prior to making any recommendations to allow for more intense development, if that even comes onto the table.
So what you're saying is you're dealing with the technical stuff, verbiage, how it's organized,
Yes.
but not changing any of what are approved regulations. Just,
As of yet, but
but then it's our job to say, do we need new regulations
Yeah.
to help certain goals? Like we created a regulation for 10% affordable units if we build a project bigger than X number of units. And then we have a regulation for, accessory dwelling units. But then some people are afraid, oh, my neighborhood is gonna change. Well, I don't think it will if it's zoned for single-family homes and it's already built up with those and full already, and identify where there is land still available for development, and the land trust authority locked down at least 1,000 acres over the last 10 years or so that's permanently open space.
Right.
And what's left. So it's good to have a concept of what's left that can be developed. And what's it zoned for?
Yeah.
And what's.
Yeah, that's a
The
function,
way we have
that's a
now-
function of the planning commission's responsibilities, it really is. But by and large, which is, I think you have a very good POCD that was just, done not 2 years ago. This process, as Francisco is gonna tell you, is not intended to, it's intended to look at the recommendations of the POCD to see whether there are missing pieces that we could take, a recommendation that we should do this, we should have a regulation that does this, and ask you to consider a regulation like that adopted. But it's not, this process is not gonna look at changing your POCD or adding new areas for new development. By and large, that map will stand, and it's supported because it does have some recency bias. We just did it. And so this process is not gonna do
We're
that.
trying to make sure that the zoning bylaws are supporting the P.
Yes,
OC.
that's exactly right.
Yes.
Can I, or they maybe aren't right now?
Can I make a suggestion? I wanna be able to have Francisco get through his presentation, so if we can kind of get through the presentation, write down, I know, did you have a question?
It is not as material as getting through
Okay,
this.
so if we
yeah.
can, because then I think it's not just all about housing and residential, so I just want to
There's a
be
little
able
bit
to.
more to it.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
if that's okay, if we can.
Yes, please.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Well, I mean, you've impressed upon me how important of an issue this is.
Yeah.
Right, and it is in most of the communities that I'm working with. All right, so let's continue that being said. Commercial and industrial zones, and here there's a little bit of overlap with the issue of housing, because as I mentioned, you do allow housing in Simsbury Town Center zone, by example. And some of these commercial industrial areas seem to be the areas where, at least speaking with people in the workshop, people seem most comfortable with development and mixed use and more intensity, along Route 44 or along Route 10. And these could be opportunities for housing, and we know we're in a really challenging market for office markets with high vacancy rate. Retail is not great. Service-based businesses seem to be doing better. But you have a lot of commercial properties. You have some fairly expansive commercial zones. Most of your town is residential, single-family residential. But these may be opportunities as we think about housing to consider allowing more housing in your commercial industrial zones. And as I talk about Public Act 25-1 a little later, you'll understand there's some direct implications there. So overall, people just seem to think that the town just needs to do more with these zones, and I think, generally speaking, people aren't aware of just how much the town typically is active in supporting development and healthy commercial district. There's actually a lot of work that goes into that on the part of many different boards, commissions, and departments. But people really seem to think that there's more opportunity in your commercial zones to better support retail service and restaurants, or kind of more vibrant nodes, to consider more mixed-use development in those zones as well. And some of these recommendations get beyond what you could do through zoning, right? They get into kind of policy issues, economic development issues. But there seemed to be support for just thinking a little bigger about your commercial zones and trying some new things. And so that was the general theme of the discussions that we had, as I understand it. Any thoughts on that? Okay. All right, well, let's continue. Sustainability and environmental protection. We had a strong advocacy group represented, by Conservation Commission and or your
The Sustainability
Planning
Commission.
Commission. Yeah, your Planning
Sustainability
Commission acts as your Conservation Commission. Yeah, that's your Sustainability Committee. And so I think a lot of what we captured was really driven by the turnout that they generated and some of their interests. But these are important issues that that come up in a lot of the other communities that we work. So there's an interest in within the zoning regulations requiring more sustainable elements in any form of development, right? Whether it be solar panels or reducing impervious surface or planting more trees or rain gardens or better stormwater management. And there's certainly your stormwater management plan makes recommendations to your zoning. A lot of it's already been implemented, but there's probably a little more that can be done. And there's certainly quite a bit we can do through zoning to encourage more sustainable development, some of which can be an absolute requirement. Other types of regulations can be advisory, can just kind of use should language and recommend best practices. And in some cases, you can have incentives built in. So I think there's some promise there. Again, a lot of these ideas are really larger scale policies for the town to consider with respect to sustainability and environmental protection. Okay, next. Site parking and landscaping standards. And here I think there's quite a bit more that you could do. And through this work, I think you could also address some sustainability issues. You have very little regulation with respect to parking lots. You require a minimum number of spaces, and spaces have to be this big, and it's very minimal, and there's a lot more you could do to require capture of stormwater through your zoning regulations on site, to require more tree planting, better landscaping, better pedestrian connections, and really less impactful large parking areas. So I think we might want to consider that. Landscaping standards is part of that. It sometimes is related to parking lots, but also is related to any site in general. You could have far more robust tree planting requirements, buffering requirements, screening requirements. And site in general, you could have better pedestrian accommodation requirements. As a very specific example, you have almost nothing for fence or wall regulations with respect to height of fences or restrictions on fencing in the front yard. So there's definitely a lot that can be done there. So I see a lot of opportunities there that I think most people would be pretty supportive of, and we'll want to explore that. With respect to signs and outdoor lighting, they kind of go hand in hand. Because we're talking about visual impact, and you have fairly new outdoor lighting regulations. They're pretty good. There's probably some small adjustments we could make to those to strengthen them even more, but they're pretty good. But your sign regs, we have work that we really have to do there, and your signs are not content neutral. There was a Supreme Court ruling probably about 10 years ago now, it's Reed versus Town of Gilbert, that basically found that your sign, through your zoning regulations, you can regulate time, place, and manner signage. Basically their construction, how big they are, how many of them there are, how they're lit, if they're lit at all, et cetera, whether they're permanent or temporary, what type. But you can't regulate signs by way of their message, the content, right? So you have to be agnostic with respect to the content. And your sign regulations are kind of a hodgepodge. Some of it's content-based, realtor signs, that sort of thing. And some of it's just, wall sign, ground sign, whatever it is, freestanding sign. So we should really get those fully content neutral. Most communities in Connecticut or across the country, right, have not taken the initiative to update their sign regs. They're just gonna wait to get sued and then deal with it. It really, that's what it comes down to, right? We've got a Supreme Court ruling that says you can't do this. So if you go to any state court, the state is really gonna have no choice but to follow what the Supreme Court has ruled. So we should do that, right? And we can do it, I've worked with a lot of communities to do this without really changing things. You're still allowing same size of signs, same number of signs, same kind of lighting, same kind of construction, same location. But we just organize it differently, we call the signs by different terms, we describe it differently, and so we could still regulate effectively without, opening up Pandora's box. But at the same time, put you in a position where you have a little less legal exposure.
And the only thing I want to say here is this is something that I'd like to address sooner rather than later. I've told you a couple of times, and George as well, I don't want to wait until middle of next year to address this because there is a pressing need that's been identified by our small businesses. This has a negative impact on them. So I'd like to address this.
Okay.
I don't want to wait until your final draft.
Okay, all right. And I do understand that you've been doing some work on the signage issue, like temporary signs and that sort of thing. And so that's going to be one of the next things we move on to is a review of your sign regs. And so I think we can not only rewrite them to be content neutral, but we can address some of these ongoing issues that have been in discussion at the same time.
Would you also be addressing, I know it's come up in the sign regs, buildings that are existing that then have like their own sign package, but sometimes it's not conducive because that package could have been from 1989 and now we're trying to match a sign from 1989, but it's not 1989 anymore and it feels like we're like repeating history. Is there, you're able to write something in that can help with that issue?
We can. I'm dealing with something very similar in Glastonbury right now. We rewrote their sign regs and we developed something called a sign program that requires that any signage that's substantially overhauled has to come in for a new sign program approval. And the sign program is really, it's kind of what it sounds like. You kind of commit to certain terms with respect to signage, how many, how big, where they're located, and then just certain design parameters, materials, that sort of thing, lighting, types of lighting used. And then beyond that, when you swap out signage, you make minor changes, you replace a sign, as long as it's within the accepted program, right, you don't have to send people back through a whole new like special permit type process again. So that's one of the mechanisms we devised to help encourage kind of older, outdated signage programs or signage on a property come into a new program to ensure them, hey, when you make future changes, it's just going to be very procedural for you, and we can handle a lot of that administratively. So I think there's.
It's like when there's multiple signs within one building, but the signs are like getting updated at different times, it becomes a challenge to like have uniformity, but also like not get stuck in the past for like whatever the oldest sign on the building ever was, you know, to try to match it. It doesn't always make sense.
That was exactly the conversations we had around approving a sign program instead of approving specific exact signs that then you're locked into, you know, the mid-1980s.
Yeah.
Right? And if the only way to do something new is you have to go start from scratch with special permit, you gotta go through approvals and so we design a program that allows them to be updated and refreshed under the conditions and terms, being, you know, you get this many signs, this much square footage, you know, these can be lit, et cetera, and as long as you're within those constraints, you can refresh the materials and look, and the content you certainly can.
Great, thanks.
Okay. All right, good. Okay, well, let's continue. The new ideas, this was, you know, a lot of these tie into the other discussions. We just have people that are super eager to talk about those issues again to somebody else. In case the first person wasn't listening to me, I'm gonna come tell you too. And so they run the gamut from things that you don't really do right now to things we kind of addressed in some of these other topic areas, which include, and our notes are a little sparse for this, because this particular station had the least attendance. People seem receptive to deploying solar over parking lots, right? There are benefits to that. Reduce urban heat island effect, you shade the vehicles underneath, you generate power, these are all good things. Promote the placement of utilities underground, and you can require that through your zoning regulations. It's not always feasible or practical depending on, you know, what kind of utilities you're talking about. You know, add incentives to sell state-owned land. You don't do that through your zoning. Allow portable and ground-mounted solar. So we're hearing again solar, just more flexibility with respect to solar. Provide town-funded affordable housing. That's a policy decision, but you know, it speaks to the need maybe to address the issue of housing affordability, affordable housing through your zoning as possible. I talked about parking lot design already. We had support for that. Improve regulation of home businesses. This came up through the residential housing, residential zoning discussion as well. So it's either one person that was very vocal about it, but it was more than one person was concerned about accessory uses in residential zones and home-based businesses, ensuring that they don't become nuisances and they're properly regulated. So your regulations seem pretty good, but we'll have to take a look at that. And then stronger requirements for planting, native planting, tree planting, that sort of thing. Okay. Any questions on all of that? All right, well, let's talk about the work that we're up to. So the draft zoning regulations, as I mentioned, we've developed a draft. So we've taken your existing zoning document and we've moved them into a new format. And along the way, we've fixed a lot of things. And so that new format's a working draft document. It's nowhere near ready for adoption because we have all these big important issues to address. But, and you've probably seen this slide before, I've shown it to the commission, I showed it at the workshop as well, the zoning commission at our prior meeting. So we've moved things into a new format, and not only is it just more visually appealing, I think, its format is consistent, it's organized, it's structured, we have consistent nomenclature, the numbering system. You know what page you're on. If you're using it digitally, things are hyperlinked. You've got navigation tabs. The table of contents is hyperlinked. There's one font used, not three or four fonts. All the fonts are the same size. There are healthy margins on the document. So I think that alone, if we came in and did nothing but put it into a new format that's more usable, I think you get a lot of value from that alone. So we're off to a good start as far as that's concerned. So the differences being, I was actually surprised once we got into the new format that we actually added some pages. We usually reduce the number of pages, but your font is so small and your margins are so narrow that you're just cheating.
So you have bigger font.
It is, yeah, exactly. In Manchester, we went from 450 pages down to 200, and we didn't throw out zoning districts. It was just better organizing. So I kind of had the same hopes here. But so we have something that's consistent in length, but I think far more usable. It's broken up into 32 instead of 18 sections, which sounds like a lot, but that just makes it a little more manageable because we're trying to cover less ground. Right.
It's when you go from 18 to 32, you're not adding anything, right? So it's just.
Yeah, we just broke things up into smaller pieces.
Okay.
You have 4 themes in your regs, but they're just introduced at the beginning and things aren't really organized that way. But we're going to articles, which is a little more conventional for an ordinance to have an article. And we have 7 of them. And those are just big buckets to put things in so you can jump from one part of the document to another, and it groups similar type sections. Each section, it has a unique number, so there's no duplicates. There's not a section 7 here and a section 7 somewhere else, right? So when you say section 7, there's one place in the document. So you wouldn't need to say Article 1, section 7 versus Article 2, section 7, because there's only one section 7. So I think this format, again, alone is going to work much better. But as I mentioned, that's where we begin. That's kind of that's a labor-intensive part, but it's actually the easy part. So the first things we did when we started the project several months ago is we did a line-by-line review, which means going through the document line by line, every page, and flagging everything that is an issue. Needed to be discussed or corrected. I think it was 922 items, individual items, and we've addressed all but 100 or so of those remaining. And a lot of these were minor, spelling errors and grammar and wrong cross-reference and stuff like that. But some were actually pretty major. By example, you have zones listed in your zoning regulations that aren't on your map, zones on your map that aren't in your zoning regulations. That's actually a very big problem. So we've corrected all these issues. I'm not going to read them. It's all there for your benefit, right? And that, as I mentioned, this is the straightforward stuff. It had to be done. It took some meetings and discussions with town staff to try to understand what the intent of some of the wording was, the wording that was problematic or vague or unclear, whatever it was. And then once we all came in agreement as to what it was trying to do, then for us, it was very clear as to how to handle it. So the ongoing work involves 122 remaining items that we need to address. Again, some very minor and some big, like your sign regulations. So I want to go through these because we need to make sure that you understand what it is that we need to do, answer any questions you have, and make sure you're supporting us in this work. So starting with the first bullet, and I just said this one, all right, we need to make sure that the regulations in the map are consistent. What that means in some cases is you have zones that are on the map, an area was rezoned as a zone, and I'm forgetting the name of one of the zones now. But then the zone was basically kind of repealed, it was deleted from the regulations because you didn't want more of those zones created. The issue with that is now you have a zone on the map and there's nothing in the regulations to guide any development or redevelopment in those existing zones in the map. So we need to find where those original regulations were, restore them, and just provide language saying, no more of these types of zones shall be created, but you need to have the standards there. So that just some work involved with that, but it's very straightforward, and we've done that in other places. The next item involves the use of the word character in Connecticut Public Act 2129. Basically said that we can't use the concept of character alone as a basis for denying applications. So it isn't sufficient to say, well, that's not in character with the town, so we're denying it. You have to get into specifics about exactly what it is that you mean. So using the word character is not problematic as long as that's followed with some specifics. And the character is thrown around a lot. And in some cases where there was some other language supporting what was intended, we went ahead and got rid of character and just provided, pointed to that more specific language. But in other cases, it's used kind of loosely, and so we need to get to the bottom of that. All right, what was the commission that adopted this language? What were they really concerned about? And then we need to try to describe that as best as possible. You should have, the next item, you should have purpose statements for all your zones, or at least types of zones, and you don't. And the importance of a purpose statement is it's kind of a fallback position when you're kind of unclear as to how to interpret zoning or whether or not you should make amendments, or the amendments you're making are consistent with the function of that zone or the intent of it. A purpose statement can guide you in that. And it's not critical. A lot of zoning regs don't provide purpose statements, but it's a good thing to do. And you don't, for residential zones, you could just describe generally the purpose of residential zones. You don't necessarily need to distinguish between a certain R zone from another R zone. So that's a best practice to do that. Your graphics are really difficult to read and inconsistent, low, originally probably good quality, but low resolution, which makes them difficult to use. So we want to refresh and update all those, and maybe even provide some graphics that you don't currently provide. The next issue is really important. It's substantial. It's gonna take some work, a little bit of work to undo. It's a little bit like the character issue. There was a court case in town of Monroe, 15 years ago probably, called McKenzie versus town of Monroe, or zoning commission of town of Monroe. And it surrounded McDonald's that was being built, and the commission waived the buffer requirements because it wasn't adjacent to a dwelling. And they just said, oh, you don't have to do that, it doesn't make sense here. And a neighbor didn't want a McDonald's anywhere near them, filed suit and said, hey, the zoning regulations said you had to have a buffer of this width. You can't just say you don't have to do it in this context. And so the court case that came out of this, McKenzie case, is now referenced as a McKenzie conflict. So wherever you give the commission, the zoning commission, broad authority to waive or modify standards without very prescriptive procedure, and this is similar to the character discussion. If they're just saying, yeah, in this case, no problem, you don't have to do that, or we actually want you to do this instead, that's very problematic, because that could be perceived as exhibiting bias to, in favor of or against a particular applicant. So you do have some authority to modify or vary your regulations. but it has to be prescribed within the zoning regulations. The rules need to be laid out so that they can be applied equitably to every single applicant and every single condition. And you have a lot of instances where it just says, the zoning commission could waive or modify this, no problem. And that is a problem. And so we need to correct all of that, which doesn't imply we have to remove all of your discretion, but it needs to be really specified and procedural so it can be applied consistently. So that's very important work that should be done. I talked about sign regs already. Your floodplain regs, they're effective, but Connecticut Deep has model floodplain regs that are much more recent. Connecticut adopted international building code several years ago as the state building code, and it has there's a lot of flood hazard zone construction content in there that the model floodplain regs now make reference to. So we should really update those regs so it's consistent with the best practices being provided by DEEP right now. And their regs were updated as recently as last year. I was in contact with someone at DEEP that sent me the most recent version. So we should do that, right? Because it's the most sound, up-to-date requirements. And it's going to be largely consistent with the way you regulate flood hazard zones right now, your floodplain regs. But just the details will be more up to date. Okay. Stormwater management, as I mentioned, you have stormwater management plan that makes some recommendations regarding your zoning, and some of which has been implemented, but there's a little bit more we could do within the regs, and so we want to follow up on that. And outdoor dining, you have to allow outdoor dining. This is another aspect of Public Act 2129. It's a COVID-related thing. You have to allow it as of right use. There are certain conditions or parameters you can put around that. You have to maintain handicap access and this and that, hours a day. But we want to update your regulations to ensure that you're allowing it as you have to be allowing it. And at the same time make sure you have some regulation to help control it where you do have a measure of control. And the next, your alcoholic use regulations are really outdated, very dated. They really need to be refreshed. The general direction we're going, and the direction the state is headed in general is towards drinking establishments or restaurants, right? The tavern permit, which would allow a bar that serves zero food, that permit has been, basically they're not issuing new permits, they're phasing out all the tavern permits, the state is Liquor Control Commission. They're switching over to cafe licenses where you have to have a little bit of food. So we're kind of in a different era surrounding these. The real issues around package stores. But those should be refreshed and updated. By example, I've done some work for a town of Greenwich on Main Street. They had a 500-foot or 1,000-foot distancing requirement between alcohol serving establishments. The issue is with the retail environment being the way it is, they had some vacant storefronts on Greenwich Avenue, which they don't like in Greenwich. And restaurateurs that wanted to come in, but they wouldn't be able to serve alcohol because there was another establishment a few hundred feet down the road. So we came in, we worked with them, and basically just got rid of it. And said, let's get rid of this distancing requirement. Why, who needs this? And everyone agreed, we don't need this anymore. So we got rid of it and got new restaurants in Greenwich Ave. Everyone's happy. So there's definitely some work we could do there. Okay. Let's keep going. Got one more slide to this effect. Okay. Am I going the right way? Yeah. No. So, page. Turn to, I apologize. Okay. Bottom right, upper left. Sure. We need to update your pad zone regulations. You have these different floating zones, and each one has its own procedure for this is how you get the zone adopted. In the pad zones being one example, and either way we're talking about the same thing. You have to change the zoning regs, you have to do a master plan, get that approved, get a zone approval, redo the zoning map, and then follow that up with the site plan. It's the same procedure, yet it's laid out completely different for very similar type of floating zones. It's best to be consistent, and so what we want to do is we want to take all those different procedures that are all working towards the same thing, merge them into one procedure. If you're doing a zone change, this is the procedure, right, for a floating zone, for a zone that's described in your zoning regulations that you can rezone to. This is the procedure, and you just refer back to and from those zones. So you have one consistent approach, it's clear to everyone, the staff isn't saying, well, wait a minute, didn't we do it this way in the pad, but now in this zone, so we'll save a couple pages on that too, so bring us back on that side. We'll see what we can do. Community residences. So your zoning regulations are okay. Community residences are something you have to allow. The state says you have to allow. We used to call them group homes. They're called community residences now. And there are different types. There are community residences for adults with, disabilities or other types of issues where they have trouble living independently. You have them as well for children, and there are different types, but they're all regulated in the same way by the state, which state basically says that you have to allow these things in any single family zone, and you can't require a permit as greater than whatever you require for single family housing. So your regulations don't address this at all, so because of that, you're kind of okay, because presumably they're just being treated like single family homes. But we should probably make it clear that yes, these things are allowed, they are allowed the same way you allow single family homes. So it's not an issue for further staff or future staff or commission when you have someone that says, hey, I want to do one of these, I'm good to go, right? And someone raises a flag and says, wait a minute, we don't allow those. Auto sales and service and gas station establishments, there's a separate approval type called a certificate of locational approval that's required for those. And the state has at least 4 different times over the last 20 years changed its mind about who needs to be issuing those. And so it's been the CBA, it's been staff, it's been commission. And so now it's back to, depending which one, the zoning enforcement officer or planning and zoning commission. So we need to update those because it's not, you're not up to date with respect to that. It'd be a good idea to provide reference to handicap parking requirements. Most of that's driven by building code, but it's a good thing to put in your zoning regulations to make sure it's getting included on a site plan, being thought of from the beginning. It'd be good to make cross references to your East Weetag Historic District and Historic District Commission, just in terms of procedurally, where do they fit in reviewing applications? There are no references right now. We should provide standards or requirements for earth excavation outside the HOD zone, where you do have a bunch of regulations controlling earth excavation, but just in that zone and nowhere else in town. So we might want to pull those regulations out of that zone, apply that more universally, because this is a really important issue. And this is something that in a lot of communities, these uses can be abused by someone who gets a site plan approval to do some excavation, and a few years later nothing's built, but they've hauled off thousands of yards of material and made a lot of money in the process, and the homes never showed up or whatever it was supposed to be. So to the extent you have some stronger regulations that are applied throughout the town, it would be beneficial. Your special exception application and procedure requirements, well, you need some. It's very lean. You talk about, you've got a good section on what the commission needs to consider in approving an application, but you provide no instruction to the applicant as to what they need to provide you. They have to kind of walk it backwards. Well, if the commission's looking for this, then I guess I should provide this amount of information to satisfy them. It'd be good to have it really a checklist of what an applicant needs to provide so that you can make your determinations. And you don't have that right now. Public Act, we're going to talk about Public Act 25.1 in a moment. Your agricultural regulations, they just vary quite a bit. And, we know your community has got a strong agrarian history and active agriculture. We should just be more consistent across the board with those, and that would make them stronger. Accessory uses, your business industrial zones don't really touch upon this issue at all. You've got pretty good regs for your residential zones, but, it's like, I guess accessory structures and uses are allowed, maybe. And then I talk off-street parking, in addition to just design requirements for off-street parking. We should really take a look at the numbers, with respect to the spaces that you actually require to make sure it's right-sized. You're not requiring too much, you're not requiring an applicant to, or you're not allowing an applicant to provide a fraction of what they need. So we should revisit all those numbers, and we've got transportation engineers on staff that are very good at that. Okay, so that's the ongoing work. These are things that we really should do and we know we need to do. Beyond that is the work to consider. And this is we'd really appreciate your feedback on these items. And I'll just go through the list, and I'll invite anyone to speak up on these issues. First of all, your ADU regulations, your accessory dwelling unit regulations. Based upon the feedback we received at the workshop, we think you should consider relaxing those regs a little bit, lowering some of the permit requirements.
Didn't we just relax
Yeah, we
this?
just did.
What,
You
88?
just updated.
We just
you
created
updated
one,
it.
but it's pretty.
They're pretty relaxed.
I was gonna say, but
Do you have-
with
do you have
relax
any-
it, you don't need,
So that surprised me too. Do you have an example of where
Yeah.
it would be relaxed?
Um,
Currently, it's as of right with a more liberal
Detached.
size requirement.
Yeah, what's your current requirement for detached?
By right,
Okay.
Yeah.
by right, attached and detached, matter of right.
Yeah, I mean, the
So-
size is maybe the only.
With the,
Our size is
thirty
more liberal than the
percent,
state, right?
Yeah,
only
all right. So I think what we're looking at there is getting into
whichever is-
the size and ratio requirements, any affordability requirements around those.
take a look, I think it's pretty permissive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, considering what we just.
To jog my memory, do we have a
There's
residency
so many other
requirement
things
or an
that-
occupancy requirement on that?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, we had, either had to live in the ADU or the home,
Okay.
Yeah.
yes.
But that goes away once the home is sold, is that right?
No,
Or
does
no?
not.
There's always an occupancy requirement for ours?
I think so, yeah.
Maybe that's what you mean? I don't know.
There was an occupancy, yeah.
Yeah, generally speaking, we saw some areas where they could be even a little more flexible, which isn't to say yours are rigid, because in some communities I work in, they don't allow detached units.
Sure.
Right. They
Maybe
require
perhaps just-
special permits, special exceptions.
Why don't you just hear, Francisco, why don't you just come up with some suggestions, some things you think we should look at, and then we can take a look at it.
Well, I just have a question. What should our role be in versus your role
Yeah,
to update or
so
these things?
I was planning on walking you through the next steps, but let's talk about that. This evening, I was hoping to just get some general direction as to things that you seem very supportive of, things that maybe you're pushing back against. Like I'm hearing you feel like your ADU regs are pretty close to where they should be. Okay, well, maybe there's not that much work to be done there.
I would say on that one, just that could just be maybe a lack of imagination, right? Like I have not, if there's other ways to do it out there that we don't know about, I'd like to at least hear about them, and we can shoot them down if we don't like them, yeah.
But more than anything, we're looking for some direction and, some support in tackling some of these issues. And then what we'll do is we'll actually draft some amended language that we think responds to, what needs to be done and what you'd be willing to support. And the next step in the process would we'd walk you through what those changes are and what we're advising to consider. And at which point, it's not a take it or leave it proposition. It's, maybe dial that down a little bit. Maybe we can do more here. But we need to figure out what's a priority within your regulations. Because as you imagine, we could go in any particular direction, and we could go really, really hard on the issue of sustainability and resilience and go really hard on the issue of housing and expanding housing diversity. And I just need to just get some general understanding of where you're at both commissions are at with these issues. Okay. All right, the next one is solar. So as I mentioned earlier, there seemed to be support for allowing solar over parking lots and being a little more permissive. And so are there thoughts on that? Are there concerns about seeing
Are we
Like
not
ground-
permissive today, or are we just not addressing it?
They require approval.
Yeah, so
Town
there's,
Eversource.
We don't have particularly good guidance
yeah,
for homeowners
right.
and kind of size requirements to put solar in their backyard that's not attached to their homes, for instance.
Ground mounted
Like,
solar.
that would be one example. We don't really have great guidance. I think the zoning commission recently dealt with a fairly
Yeah, the one.
not controversial one, but
Simsbury Farms.
that had,
Oh,
there was
the
a special
the
exception for the
covenant
church.
one?
But again, we don't have great guidelines to how, what size is permitted.
Right.
So that's what I would see as kind of a primary
A
approach.
couple of things they came up with. I had several meetings with the Sustainability Committee, and solar was a big topic of discussion. A couple of things they would like is to require all new homes to be solar ready. What that means is that the roof has to be strong enough to support panels, it has to have the wiring, whatever. They also wanted, they were also pushing for location of the home on, having the house on the property be at the location most conducive to solar power.
Well, it's siting
Yeah.
on a lot
Right,
oriented toward the southwest.
exactly, so,
Very prescriptive.
yeah, so,
It's too much
No, I'm-
personally.
I'm not,
Flies in the face of affordability.
Okay,
That's
I'm
one of
just-
the reasons.
no,
we
I'm
don't
not,
get-
it's not
Yeah,
a
it's
debate,
just
I'm just
messenger.
telling you what,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the,
some of the things that are encompassed by this language. I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
have an opinion, I'm not advocating one way or the other, I'm telling you
right.
what sustainability was.
So there's interest in
Active,
being
yeah, there's
more
definitely
supportive of
interest in
solar,
this, but-
whether
Yeah.
active or passive. That as far as like the solar ready, that's a building code. You wouldn't handle that through your zoning regulations, you do that.
Well, but the state just passed that plug-in solar bill, so anyone can set them up in their yard, and we can't say anything about it.
Up to a certain size.
1200 watts.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Well,
So I think there's more we
The
could
state's
do.
controlling a lot of the solar, like the solar farms and stuff.
Well,
as
solar
well,
farm,
or,
we're talking about residential scale, anything that falls below
Or
the
it says
Connecticut
over
Siting
parking.
Council.
It says over parking areas, so does that would apply commercially, I would think.
Or
Yeah,
it's
it
gotta be a
would, but
certain
it's
size.
nothing that would be at the level of the Connecticut Siting Council.
It's gotta be huge.
Yeah, so by example, in some communities where I work, they've allowed ground mounted solar, but they didn't allow it to be high enough. They put a limit and so prohibit its use over parking, so we create an exception that when built over parking could be up to 20 feet tall or wherever to allow parking underneath. So I think there's more we can do there to actually be prescriptive in your zoning regs to not only allow it, but also to adequately regulate it. And your regulations just really don't touch upon it, which is problematic because zoning regulations, well, anywhere, but in Connecticut are permissive in nature, meaning the uses that are allowed are the uses that you state are allowed and everything else is presumed to be prohibited. Okay, so if you're not stating that this is allowed, then the default position is you have to deny things.
Then I think, we would wanna look at allowing it, but I don't know that we would wanna be, and I know you were just saying what was said to you, but just in case it wasn't clear, I don't think we would really want to regulate the orientation of a building on a private lot to have to be
I
facing
agree.
a certain way.
I agree, I think we have to leave it up to the market to make those decisions.
Isn't it in our plan of conservation development that it's a goal to maximize orientation for solar when, developing?
not orientation on the property. I
we
don't,
don't
we
have
don't
that
go
in
into
there.
that
I was gonna
specific.
say that
That's
sounds
not
too
in the-
detailed.
That's way too specific, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we talk about solar, just, you know, more green,
Yeah,
but nothing that specific.
yeah, development more conducive or something like
Yeah.
that, yeah.
And like town, you know, to
Yeah, definitely town buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure. Yeah, I think anything to do with adding more solar, I mean, we can write it however it needs to be written, but I think
Okay.
there's strong support for that.
How about wind power?
Is there such thing as residential
small-
wind power?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
There is.
Spinning.
There's-
It's not as, it's not as popular as solar.
Yeah.
Because the generation rate is lower compared to the same, you got for the same investment in solar.
Environmental impacts can be,
Yeah, I mean, we're just talking
You don't
about
want
pretty
them on the
small, at the
residential.
residential scale, you know, you're
Residential anyway.
limited in height by your zoning regulations, so we're talking about something 30 feet tall.
Yeah.
It's so.
I mean, you also have to be in an area where you're gonna get enough wind, so
Where
putting it
you're
in a
getting enough
neighborhood, you're not
wind, so
gonna, I
it's-
can put one in my backyard, it's not gonna do any good.
Yeah.
You're gonna be out in West Simsbury, somebody on 5 acres to make it any kind of worth
On
it.
top of a hill.
yeah, what you're gonna have to do is hit Talcott Mountain and like that's, I don't think what anybody
I
wants.
don't think we
So-
can do that anyway.
Well, if the fallback position is permissive by nature and we don't,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, you know,
It's the
we
other
had
way.
a big conversation on solar,
Yeah.
a couple different iterations. Well, there's other alternative energy sources
Yeah.
out there.
I think he's saying the opposite, he's saying if we don't specifically allow it, it's not allowed.
Right.
Yeah.
If that's the
Yeah.
fallback position, then, you know, I really, I can withdraw my comment.
I mean, I think if the regulation already, or if our regulation, our zoning regs already speak to it, having a limit of 30 feet or whatever you said, I mean, I think that's fine. I mean, if someone can find a yard in Simsbury where there's enough space and you get enough wind,
Yeah, you can require, you can have distancing requirements that require it to be a certain distance from any structure or
Yeah.
property line.
yeah. I mean, if we don't have those already, that
You
makes
know,
sense.
Nick, what's a, residential, commercial solar panels, what, 100 watts?
600,
600, how big's that one?
4x8.
Okay, how about the little ones?
I mean, you can get them as big or as small as you
Right,
want,
you
but
can get a little windmill, like that
Yeah,
goes on a
100%.
sailboat,
Yeah.
that's 150 watts.
yeah.
So,
I'm saying you gotta have enough wind to power it, otherwise
yeah.
I can put it in my
Maybe on
backyard.
that sailboat.
They tend to be pretty pricey because you have to have pretty substantial foundation,
Yeah.
so
And it-
structurally.
Just trying,
Yeah.
I'm trying to make sure we don't have a blind spot, you know?
Yeah, and that's fair. I think, I mean, there certainly spacing requirements for property lines or buildings make sense, but I mean, if, you know, somebody out in the sticks in West Simsbury wants to put one in their backyard, who
Yeah,
cares?
I would say though, even, that's so rare to me that if someone really wants that, they can come to us with a zone change.
Yeah.
They can do the work themselves, and figure out how it's gonna work, cause how much time are we gonna spend on a product that I literally till today didn't know existed? Like, you know.
Well, those are the ones that catch you by surprise.
But as you
Yeah, right,
mentioned,
but
he
that-
needs
but-
priorities.
But that's what I'm saying, leave it
As it-
leave it as is,
Wait
and
for it
if,
to
so-
become
if,
a big problem.
no, not till it becomes a problem, someone says, hey, look, I wanna put wind on my thing, and here's my recommended zoning change, and then we can take a look at it on the merits there, but I mean, until then, it just doesn't seem like,
But
'Cause it-
someone can come and say, you know, I'm gonna put it up. I don't see anything in the regs that, you know, that
Well,
makes it
there's nothing in
unpermitted.
the
but if we don't allow it, then it's not allowed, right? We have to affirmatively say this is allowed, and if we don't, then they can't.
That's what you're saying.
Alright,
Yeah.
too much time,
No worries.
small
All right.
subject,
Well, it's-
just trying to
it's-
make a
well,
point.
You know, it's an important issue.
No, but you've got two good, so on bullet point 2 and bullet point 5,
Yeah.
and I think I think you can kind of combine those almost, and
Mhm.
I think the commissions would like to see, you know, some options for there.
Sure, okay. We'll work our way back to 5, but let's go down the next slide. But you have, you require a special exception for a lot of requirement, for a lot of your commercial and business zones, industrial zone, you need a special exception to do quite a bit. And you know, that's a preferred way of doing business in a lot of Connecticut, it's either a counter approval for something, it's a zoning permit, or it goes to the commission and it's a special exception or special permit, and there's a public hearing, it's one or the other. But there is a middle ground, you know, site plan application requirement for certain scales of development that you require goes to the commission for review and approval. You require a site plan, a certain amount of documentation. But the criteria is really, it's very limited compared to special exception. You're considering really the site itself and whether or not the project's compliant with your zoning regulations. You're not thinking about a lot of the externalities you might think about with a special exception. And there's no public hearing requirement. So there's kind of a middle ground you're missing in Simsbury with a special exception requirement for a lot of uses. So if there's one area that I think we could explore, if you're supportive of that idea, is taking a look at your uses and starting to think about what do we really need a special exception for? And is it a specific type of use? Or is it driven by a scale of use, a size or the amount of parking it's going to generate or require? Or and how do we handle change of uses? If we had a restaurant that was approved in this building through a special exception, and 5 years later it's out of business and a new restaurant comes in, how should that be treated? Do we need to send them back through the whole special exception process and a public hearing to, change use for a change of tenants for the same use? So I think that should all be revisited, and the way I would approach it is we wouldn't just take the way you do things and throw it out. We'd be very judicious and looking at some of those uses, identifying the ones that are probably the least impactful given the zones in which they're allowed. And it would be a zone by zone type discussion. It wouldn't just be that retail everywhere should be a zoning permit or whatever it may be. But we should think about it on a zone by zone basis. What zones do we want to be more permissive and allow things just to happen more easily? And what zones do we need to really maintain a higher standard because of their proximity to residences and residential zones or for whatever reason? So if there was support for that general approach, we'd come back with some recommendations as to how you might be able to handle that.
Yeah, I think that'll be good. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, that's good, because if the commission's time is spent on special exception after special exception, public hearings on things that are going to be approved anyway, it's not a good use of our time, and it actually, in my opinion, reduces the public's ability to provide input, because they're, 2-3 people come to every single meeting on every single little thing. If the public really wants its valuable input, we want to be focusing on tackling big issues where the public input is going to be very important. If we spend all our time on ticky-tack stuff, then we're actually not giving meaningful time for the public to talk about the meaningful things that are going to be coming forward.
I would look for balance there though, because I think there might be the inclination to okay, let's limit these as much as possible so we don't have that, but I know that the community as a whole really values that ability for input and I'm gonna say transparency. They view their ability to speak as part of transparency, even though I understand having more clear regulations actually kind of provides more transparency because it's very clear and obvious how things need to happen and what's going to happen. That's very transparent, but they really value the ability to come and speak on behalf of things, and that's really important to people. So of course, it takes up our time, but I would look for balance in that. I wouldn't look for limiting it as much as possible because I just feel like people want to have their say. It's just part of the fabric of this community.
All right.
But it does bog you down sometimes.
Yeah, it does.
And
No,
stuff
it does.
that's gonna be, I mean.
Stuff that's gonna be approved anyway.
Yeah,
The neighbor coming in
You're gonna
saying,
get
I
the
don't like the
same-
color orange, they
Yes,
can't build it. Well, I'm
exactly.
sorry, that's not gonna sway us.
That's right.
And if it did sway us, we'd just get sued anyway. So I mean, it's
And yet, there's something important about them being able to do it. I personally think that people feel regardless of what the result is, that it's important that they get to be
But they can
heard.
always contact through email. I don't think you
I
need a
know,
public
but-
hearing to come and
I'm not
to
saying
use
for
that
every little
extreme
thing.
exam-
Right,
Yeah,
but I
because
think-
that just does bog you down, and people
Yeah.
can always contact via email. We've gotten stuff on the planning commission from people that have contacted us through email and that information, so it doesn't stop that, it's just that.
No, I mean,
Yeah,
people
yeah.
do, but it also, people, if they don't like something, we need to be doing it in a legislative approach, right? I don't like the way this law is written, and I'm gonna do an amendment to the zoning commission and put it in front of them, right? As opposed to every single individual little project. If they don't like the kind of projects that's being made, they should come up and do we'll have a public hearing for a zoning commission, a zoning change. I mean, that's the legislative process,
Well,
right?
hopefully they're participating in this process and that is gonna help,
Well,
but
that's a huge part,
I'm just saying, I
absolutely.
think I would look for balance and not for full, like, not to look
Right.
for elimination as much as possible, but just areas where we can streamline, but looking for some balance there.
You
It's
know,
not like
from
I'd
an
like to sit and
economic-
do that, but
From an economic development point of view, or, 15 years ago when I was on the task force for economic development, that's always been called out as one of the biggest hurdles, and I've known businessmen who wanted to open up companies, manufacturing companies in this town and said, screw it, I'll just go somewhere else.
But our regulations will help with that, but I just feel like, I just think that public input, it just is part of the fabric of the community and
Public
people
input
expect it.
is important, but we don't need to
Whatever.
burden
You shouldn't have to hire a lawyer just to
economic
get through
development.
No, no,
If it
no,
was
no,
going
but
to
you
be
don't.
approved anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the summary is there is support for what you're proposing, but the devil's gonna be in the details, so you can come up with a
Yeah.
straw man. I mean,
Sure,
we're not making
absolutely.
a decision this evening.
No,
So
no, I know.
Tucker, you used the term, and Holly, you just said it, why should we go through this if it's gonna be approved already? How would you know if it's gonna be approved already?
Because if it follows all of the zoning rules, we would be committing malpractice to deny it. So if it's,
Why would it be a special exception if it was following all the rules?
because the way we made special exceptions were arbitrary.
For certain uses, as an
So-
example?
So what he's saying is that we do special exceptions for too many things, right?
That's his opinion, that's his,
Well, sure.
his comment.
Exactly.
But so the idea being that we have a special exception for a process that is very well regulated, so if they put their information forward, town staff is gonna say, they're gonna give us a report and say they meet all the requirements. If we were to then take public input and reject that, we are breaking the law. I mean, so
George,
so
is that-
why even do?
Is that the way it goes, George? With a special exception?
So we have special exception criteria that's elevated above regular site plan standards, right? We ask, are there traffic impacts, is the use compatible with the neighborhood? So there is a raised level of criteria to review for special exceptions.
Lot line setbacks and.
Sure.
So it is possible to deny a special,
right.
to deny an
Which is why it
application,
exists.
it doesn't need special
It's gonna be
exception.
accepted.
Well, it can be, it can be, it's very
I
seldom.
think, I know what you're saying, there's
It's
some that
rare.
are probably,
Should be.
Yeah, it's
a
rare.
little more fundamental,
It happens.
that could probably be relaxed a little bit.
Yeah.
But in terms of like economic development, I don't necessarily think the special exceptions are where the big development is, like, that's not real, those things aren't, that's not really where the special exceptions are coming in, those special exceptions are coming into like zone changes and neighborhoods and that kind of thing, and that's not really where the bulk of the economic development is really occurring, and I think that that's its own conversation, is what are we doing that's preventing the good, the right kind of developers from coming in, and maybe that's something that you're gonna talk about later, but I don't know that it's really in the special exception category.
Okay,
Point taken.
all right, so we'll come back to you with some recommendations to that effect.
But part of that, the bigger point for staff is that part of that review of special exception versus site plan versus, is that they are looking at all of our use lists.
Right.
To modernize them and to make sense of them.
Of course.
Which really needs to be done.
Oh, I think providing
Beyond
clarity to people.
Beyond deciding how they're permitted. But
Right.
just, we have different definitions of the same kind,
Oh, yeah.
we have different labels for the same uses in different zoning districts.
Yes, simplifying and consolidating, I think, is critical.
Right. Okay, very good. So related to all that in uses is, and it's not necessarily a problem, but it's an opportunity. You don't have a list of townwide prohibited uses, and the benefit of this, and as I mentioned earlier, generally speaking, whatever isn't expressly permitted is prohibited. This is like an insurance policy, that where you identify uses that you definitely do not want, unconditionally, you do not want them in the town anywhere in any zone by any means. Ooh,
Nuclear
data
power
center.
plant.
Well, and there's no
Sustainability-wise.
point,
I was gonna say, that's not gonna,
there's no point in prohibiting things that you can't control.
I do data center.
But,
Data center,
yeah,
we can
could
control
be,
data center.
could be a data center, right?
Data centers.
Hartford
and strip clubs,
South.
man.
Right.
Data centers and what?
And data centers and strip clubs, I mean.
Well, actually,
They're already,
Strip clubs are way more complicated.
they're actually a protected
Amendment.
use
That's our,
for free speech. They're-
Is that right?
Yeah, they're a
No
protected,
way.
our
they're a
increased.
protected class of use. They
No
are.
kidding.
Yeah.
Mr. Don't,
I write,
he's gonna come get me,
Right.
jeez.
I write strip
All right, here's your chance, Tucker, for a
regulations,
new
what we
business.
call them adult-oriented establishments.
Okay.
I write regulations not to enable them, but to regulate them so that, because when you don't have an
I don't think that's gonna be an
adult-oriented
issue.
establishment regulation,
Yeah.
they go wherever there is a like business that's allowed.
Right.
So if you have any sort of restaurant that
Sports
allows
bar,
live entertainment in a certain zone, strip club can go in that zone. If you don't identify adult oriented as a permitted use and you allow it somewhere, and you can have very strict regulations as long as they aren't completely prohibitive, where they make it impossible for one to locate, then you're okay. So,
Marijuana,
but you can prohibit cannabis establishments, right? The state hasn't prevented you from doing so. So it's just something to think about, whether or not you want to put
Square.
together like a dirty dozen
Right,
list.
you can't.
I've had, a lot of communities I work in do have those lists already, and we refresh them, we update them, and sometimes we do put data centers on those.
George, do we have anything else that's prohibited besides marijuana retail expressly? I think that's the only thing I'm like.
No, and again, that was done by the Board of Selectmen, but yeah.
Yeah, it was,
Correct.
yeah,
Not all
3
communities,
years ago.
not all communities feel the need to provide or adopt a list, they'll just say, well, just deny anything that we
Then it was the
allow.
referendum.
The value of a prohibited list is you make it exceedingly clear to any developer or entrepreneur that don't even come and propose it. Like, you're wasting your time to even come and propose it. Because we prohibit it outright, it's clear. You're also communicating that to future commissions, that, hey, we decided at one point we don't want this. So for them to kind of overturn that, it's a much bigger deal versus, oh, we don't say anything about it now, why not? So that's the value of it. I know in my work in Bristol, we just decided not to adopt one. There just wasn't consensus around uses. And as I provided Farmington's prohibited use list as an example, and they said, well, that looks like our economic development plan. So, communities vary.
I'd like to see I would like to see Farmington's list if you could
Also,
provide
that's one of
that,
the
yeah.
reasons I was showing other nearby communities, that, hey, these are the things that, Farmington do.
Farmington or Avon would be probably good to see, so we can kind of see.
So, I mean,
the
it's something I think at least you should consider it. I'm not saying it's a problem that you don't have one, but you should consider it. Okay, let's continue, because I have 2 slides worth of these items. Provide standards for telecommunications equipment not regulated by Siting Council. Siting Council regulates quite a bit, but with respect to telecom, they regulate towers. But they don't regulate installments on like a church steeple or something like that. They regulate towers. So you can, through your zoning regulations, you can have some real baseline regs on telecom equipment when placed on existing structures. You can require them to be kind of camouflaged, painted the same color, you can limit height, or you can have some basic controls. And you don't have anything right now. Okay. So
Give us some options.
I've come to you with something very basic to start with.
well, like there
Also,
were
we
some
need
that
more
make them look like a tree.
Yeah, but
Well, those are the towers,
Those are
right?
the-
And you can't, the Siting Council has authority over towers.
Sure.
Regulation of drive-throughs,
Got him.
you don't address drive-throughs in your zoning regulations at all. It's presumably just,
All the things, that's the thing you don't believe in?
That's bad for traffic.
Do everything you want, but not drive-throughs,
They're bad for the
okay? I got
environment.
you, Tucker.
Right
Interesting.
now, right now, town seems to be
Random
just kind of
stack
have
of
a
what don't drive
permissive
through.
approach.
Right, so we don't have,
And get one conversation.
Yes,
maybe.
one, come on, you guys.
Is there,
right, we don't have a regulation, is what you're saying.
Correct.
you don't regulate the types of establishments they can be built onto. You don't regulate the zones in which they're allowed. You don't have any sort of queuing requirements or restrictions on
Oh, let's add those.
equipment.
So that didn't get put in when we did Raising Cane's, huh? Interesting.
Yeah, cause the drive-throughs that we have are
But I'm surprised that Raising Cane's.
We have-
So we do, I mean, what we do is a more traditional referral process, which is you get a bank with a drive-through, the police review it, the town engineer reviews it,
Okay.
we say, is the queue long enough? It doesn't look like it, make the
Right.
queue longer. So there's give and take without,
Yeah,
I mean,
you don't have.
some of it's a reaction to the marketplace, you know?
Yeah.
I would
So no, but yeah, we don't have regulations.
I would say people complain about traffic on Hot Meadow all the time.
Yeah,
A
Dunkin'
de-
Donuts is a nightmare.
a decent idea would be to just say the drive-throughs we have are staying and then no more on Hot Meadow.
I don't agree with that.
No,
I don't.
We won't get any other businesses, it'll be hard to get
you don't want
things in.
drive-throughs in your main commercial area though. They're
And look at
they're
Dunkin' Donuts,
bad
any
venues.
time of the day,
Regulated
the traffic's
properly.
backed out on a Hot Meadow.
It's hard to regulate because it's too much
Alright,
space.
so
So
this
may-
is really
Maybe
specific.
I
Something to
come
look at.
back to you
Yeah.
with just something very basic as a starting point for discussion, and then you could decide, well, you know what, the way we do business now is working fine, we treat it as, it's being treated, I think, as like an a customarily incidental and subordinate accessory function. And you say, you know, it goes through your special permit requirements, as George mentioned, you've got police review, and so
All drive-throughs require special exception
Oh, is
review,
that it?
no matter the use.
So there's
So
already a
then
high
there
level
is
of
a-
discretion. The question is, you're not really restrictive with
Right,
respect
if they
to
follow the
Right,
law.
so do you actually wanna be restrictive?
Well, you can decide based on the neighborhood.
Fence and wall standards, I'll just come to you with the basic proposal. I mean, you should be regulating fences in front yards at least. You have nothing regarding whether or not it has to be open
We don't require a permit for them.
or even a permit,
We
right?
don't
You
require
have
a permit for a fence.
requirements that they be open, so you could presumably have a 6-foot-high stockade fence in the front yard, anything higher than 6 feet against the building code. So, but I don't think that's what you want in front yards, so.
Like, I don't
Wait,
know,
fencing?
are you thinking we're gonna be super restrictive on what people do on their personal property?
Yeah, what's
From a
the,
fence perspective?
Well, that's
I
what's-
mean, there's
Well,
a crazy
Yeah.
fence on one of
Well, I mean,
those
he's
roads in
gonna
West
let them
Simsbury.
throw
Yeah.
and see, I mean, you don't have to adopt
Gotta
it.
keep the
Yeah.
bears out.
but I mean, like, what's the public safety or what's the public hazard for having?
Can't see around
So
them.
zoning regulations do in fact control private property, I mean, it's exactly what they do.
Well, that's what I'm like, at what point
Yeah,
do
what's-
you?
Yes.
What's the issue with signs typically?
You
So
don't wanna
for
hide
like-
the
Well, we're on walls and
Let's
fences.
Let's start with fences.
Fences,
Yeah,
signs.
you meant
Fences,
fences,
yeah,
you meant
not signs.
fences.
Generally speaking, fence regulations are mainly concern themselves about the front yard. Right, they're generally a little not very prescriptive regarding side and rear yards, it's the front yard. And they generally require, or it's not generally, but often require or prohibit a fence taller than 4 feet in the front yard. Or require that they be a certain percentage open, so they're not a solid fence. And the reason is because a more open front yard is seen as just more communal, it feels more secure because you can see more. And that's the fundamental reason. So there is a kind of a public safety and benefit aspect of it that is rational and justifiable. Now, whether or not that's a priority for this community is another issue, right? And if you feel like we have no issues with fences across the town right now, why?
I mean, there's a couple ugly ones, but.
Yeah, well, you're always gonna have that regardless how good the
Right.
If you go to
regulations
like
are.
Arizona, everyone
If
is
it's
like
not
fenced
rural
in with
like
cinder block.
Well,
Awful.
somebody put one on Berry Lane and it looks
Yeah.
Where?
on Berry Lane.
Oh,
I don't know, in Vermont, we used to regulate
Wait,
fences
what?
like crazy.
There's a front yard
It's always-
fence.
you guys,
Solid,
one,
it looks
I just,
ridiculous.
we still, it's all, you know, We don't wanna be
Everybody
here
said
till
there
10
should be a
o'clock.
Yeah,
regulation.
yeah. We started at
Oh.
6 tonight, so let's just move forward and work.
People in my neighborhoods are like,
Better
why
than
isn't there
seven, we can
a
go.
regulation against?
Oh,
I know, I didn't have dinner if I fall.
It'd be, you know, I think it'd be interesting to see what they,
All right, so I think we would start just really very minimal with introducing something new. Let's just kind of ease into things.
Well, right, like
And-
if going back to the POCD, like nowhere are we saying like maintain, like, I'm just trying to balance where the zoning commission focuses their energy.
but we don't, there's nothing that would speak to that. I mean, we don't have anything like that.
Character,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it would be,
character
would
it would
not
be
have
more,
different
we would
fences.
look for some more, to your point, we'd look for more broad themes,
Yeah.
like the preservation of community character. And-
Yeah.
And so what is that really saying to us?
Right.
Basic driveway standards and regulations, access management can be a very important aspect of zoning, controlling how many driveways are provided per lot, how wide they are, how close they are to an intersection. You don't do any of that. There is town technical standards document, town engineering does get involved in some of that. But really you should do more through your zoning. And again, it doesn't have to be incredibly restrictive, but you shouldn't allow driveways that are excessively wide. They're not good for pedestrians that are walking in the area. They're just more pavement than you need. It really works against your best interest.
So you'll just give us like a blanket, you'll just give us some blanket text for that, that's
Yeah, it's
simple.
very
and just that.
basic. Residential driveways can be this wide. How many driveways can you have in a residence? As many as you can fit in,
Depends on frontage.
right? Right, and so you relate it to the frontage, if you have corner lot, maybe you have more than one, right? So there are just some very basic standards that we could provide that are generally gonna be reflected in 95% of the properties you have built right now. But the point is, when something new is built, you wanna make sure it's consistent with what you already allow, and you have some regulations that require it to be so.
And that would be like just approved through the town with regular process permits. You know, we want driveways coming to us if it's residential.
No, they would just have to be consistent with your standards that you require. And it's possible that some of this can be done through a separate engineering standards document, but what you do is you reference it from your zoning regulations that you require driveways to be built to that standard. So that becomes something you're reviewing for any site plan or special permit. So, wait a minute, is this consistent with their town standards?
what did we say, remember we had that subdivision off near, I don't remember where it was, but it was in another part of town, near Latham or something. There was that subdivision where there was the farmhouse they were creating for, we did something.
Oh, on Holcomb.
Yeah, didn't we ask them to do something with the material? to
Oh,
be-
yeah,
Well, we made a
permeable,
suggestion.
yeah, the
Yeah.
porous pavement.
Yes,
Yeah, the
Yeah.
permeable,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it was
take a look at it.
not necessarily
Yeah.
technically wetlands where the driveway was gonna go, but to avoid, having so much
the
impervious.
storm drain
Yeah.
runoff,
It
okay.
was a suggestion, I think, right, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, we
but
couldn't
there was-
enforce it,
Okay.
but-
Right, but we did, and I actually
So
thought it was
that's
a good
the
idea.
type of driveway standard you're
Whatever we do, we
talking
shouldn't
about.
prevent people from doing that.
Well, no, I think they're talking about here just the
Yeah.
number of driveways and how big they are.
You don't
Okay,
want-
and the next item is really pretty simple. To have some basic regulations surrounding outdoor display of merchandise would be helpful. Presumably you allow businesses to display outdoor merchandise. Well, how much area can they cover? Do they have to bring in stuff at night? Can they put it in a parking lot? Can they obstruct pedestrian access? You get water. Just some basic rules surrounding that. It would be helpful to have. You don't have anything. Presumably everyone's behaving well, but I don't know.
For
When
restrictions.
you add all these zoning regulations, like who's on tap to enforce it?
It's code enforcement, right? Yeah,
Zoning enforcement officer,
Joe.
Yeah, so that's what I'm like, do we need to balance some of this? Can you just imagine the flooding of?
It
The
becomes an
truth- the
issue when
truth-
someone complains, to be
you know,
honest.
the truth of the matter is,
Right.
a lot of that enforcement already occurs.
Yeah.
You just don't have a clear set of standards and procedure to follow.
Okay, that's fair.
You have zoning enforcement officers instead just
Okay.
responding to nuisances, and they may or may not have, Joe may or may not have the tools in the zoning regulations to actually conduct the enforcement, even
Okay,
though
that's fair.
they're responding to issues that exist and complaints being called in.
So Francisco, let me ask you a question, and,
Yeah.
I'm hearing a couple of these here, and, you know, I see people looking at each other like, that's never been a problem. Now, has it been problems in other towns?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You know, I worked in communities where you say like we got on the issue of outdoor, you know, merchandise, like we have people setting up flea markets outside, and we have to get this under control. Like they can't take up half a dozen spaces in their parking lot. We required that many parking spaces to begin with because there's demand in this area, and now people are parking at the business next door. So yeah, it has been an issue. That's why I flagged these items. And some communities do a very good job regulating these, and some don't address them at all, and they just kind of deal with issues as they occur.
I mean, how do you handle something like Tractor Supply where they take up, I don't know, a third of their parking lot with merchandise? I mean, could we write this rule to say you can't do that?
Yes.
Even though it's pretty much
Well,
their-
that's exactly
it's their
right.
whole
You could
business
say, as a business like that comes in,
Yeah.
you could say, all right, what's your plan for outdoor merchandising?
Yeah.
So Tractor Supply has an outdoor storage box on its site plan approval.
Well, but they also have
And they
whole bunch of trailers.
often we work with them to stay within those boundaries.
There's creep on that. And so that speaks to the importance of this issue. Let's continue. I want to get to this next slide.
Yeah.
You don't have any regulations addressing cutting of trees or any required replacement of trees. And most communities don't. Most communities have just some very broad and loose language that says trees should be preserved to the greatest extent possible.
Is that on like a residential basis or in like new development?
It's
Because
typically applied to a scale of trees, so we're not like regulating individual trees being cut down in people's yards. right?
Sycamores.
It's when you have a big project come forward and they're clear cutting.
Yeah.
So what constraints do you have? You can restrict amount of cutting, you can require a licensed arborist do an inventory of trees and that they be showed on a survey. You can require any, ensure native species to be preserved to the extent possible. You can require for any of those trees, if they are cut down or lost, because its development program just doesn't support their preservation, that X number of trees be provided in replacement, whether on-site or off-site, or a check be written in the equivalent amount. You can require all of those things. Most communities have just some pretty loose language to encourage people to think about trees and planning and make sure that's an element of your review and applications. You're really questioning clear cutting, removal of trees, and whether or not it's really necessary. It provides more of a focus on it. And other communities actually require, 1-for-1 or inch-per-inch replacement of certain types of trees. So I think there's more you could do there without being extremely prescriptive, just to ensure it's more of a factor in a site plan review or special exception.
I would be a fan of that. I don't think that we want to offer any option for a check because I just don't think that we have an avenue to like receive and do anything with that.
Well, I also think at this point, I mean, there's so little developable land in town left that, like we just saw with that apartment building, not only McLean, but the apartment building over by behind Mill Rates. They're talking about cutting a huge section of trees on what's an existing developed property because they need more space. And, they'll try to maintain what they can, but I mean, there's a whole host of trees there coming down. So I think something like this makes sense because any more development we get is only gonna cut into, existing forest, old growth forest, et cetera. So I think it makes sense.
I actually like the idea of like a one for like,
Yeah.
look, if you have to cut down an acre of trees or whatever in an area, put that money toward our actual protected open spaces, right? Like that acre of trees isn't a habitat for anything, but the actual protected open space is an actual habitat. Why
Yeah, I
not
mean,
put the resources toward those areas that are actually,
You're talking about any tree removal whatsoever?
No,
I mean, I have a property not in town that has not been
Not
properly managed for decades,
No.
and it's gotta have a lot of trees come down.
Talking about
but-
developments.
talk like a new development, but it's like,
It's also,
So you're trying to-
You're doing it
I think
it's clear cutting, not
You set
necessarily
a
management.
threshold to a certain acreage of trees, and then what you require is that there be a survey done of the
Yeah.
trees there. And you allow things like removal of any invasive trees, and any, dead, dying, or,
Especially in
trees.
town where we have some of the few remaining chestnuts in the country.
yeah, protecting specific types.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's explore something again, with just more supportive language to that effect. Am I on the right slide? Good, okay. The next item, we talked about a little bit already, is your site design and parking lots they really don't require much at all of the developer. Presumably, you're just kind of negotiating all that through the special exception process. But having more prescriptive standards for, screening of parking lots when they're adjacent to residential use, or planting of buffer strips, and better landscaping. What it does is it ensures that when the applicant first comes to you, that there's a much greater chance that it's going to be providing you what you're going to be asking for eventually. And so I would just consider just some very basic baseline standards that probably wouldn't look much different than what you currently require.
Yeah.
But just put it in writing, so when the design shows up the first time, it's hopefully a lot closer to what it is that you would require.
What do we require now?
Not much, if anything.
You don't, in the townwide zoning regulations, you have zero
No.
landscaping requirements.
Yeah.
The town center regulations
Yeah.
require some parking lot,
Yeah,
Trees or?
yes.
yeah, correct. It's kind of buried in your criteria for special exceptions that you need to consider the design and preservation of trees and landscaping. But to what specific standard are you taking that into consideration? It's just, it looks good to me, right?
It could be design review boards or all.
Well, it could, it doesn't necessarily need to be, if you're just very straightforward as to what the requirement is.
If you have a standard, it doesn't.
Right, there's not a lot.
We don't have a standard.
But you don't.
Exactly.
That's right. The next item it's a much bigger issue, and I'm interested in your opinion on or thoughts on this. So the state of Connecticut has enabled trap rock ridgeline protection for a certain amount of communities that have trap rock ridgelines, like as you do here with the Talcott Mountain Range. But you don't have anything in your regulations right now that is enabled by the statute.
Do we have developable land on the ridge lines?
Isn't it a state park?
I don't think we
Much
have
of
any
it's state.
developable land.
Much of it's state park. I think there is some private property to
I think the
point
western side is also trap rock.
That's right, I was gonna say, that's
And
not.
a lot of that's
I
also
would be in favor of seeing some regulations
I
on
would too.
that. I know, like, that's a
It's
treasure to our community,
Exactly.
and
Okay.
I
But we
mean,
have open developable land on those.
But it
because
doesn't
also-
matter.
It's
You don't
not,
wanna
but
have
it
to think about it.
protects, yeah,
I would.
I would
I'd protect
too.
it at all
I
costs.
would too.
So maybe what I could do is I could come back to you and show you what other communities have currently adopted in place that's been working for them for a long time that have trap rock ridgelines. There's only maybe 20 communities in Connecticut.
Just went through that last couple of years, I think, 44.
Don't we have ridge line protection for the East Ridge?
No, that's ridgeline, this is trap rock.
Okay.
Not in your zoning
but-
regulations, you do not.
It's just a state law, that's all.
You do not.
Wait a minute,
Chris, a
I
lot of
thought that-
citizens would like regulations on the sight lines of the ridge
Yeah,
line.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Oh, boy,
We
we're gonna
have-
hear about that a
That's a
lot.
different issue.
have
though.
You
regulations.
do not.
It's one of the things we're we'll consider going.
Yeah, I think that
Where you can't cut down
Yeah,
all the
right.
trees and
West
destroy
Simsbury
the
is-
view of the
Those
bridge.
are not regulations, those
It's all
are policies.
Exactly.
Oh, you have some
Exactly.
subdivision.
Yeah, subdivision
regulations.
regulations.
Valley.
You have subdivision
Like
regulations
trap
that,
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
All
it's
right.
huge,
Um,
every time.
that
The
allow
next-
for some protections like
The
that,
next
yes.
item, I think this relates to everything that we've talked about, including what we just talked about, and that's sustainable design requirements and or incentives. And so I'm hearing like, right, we don't wanna go crazy with solar-ready roof requirements and that sort of thing, but at the same time, you should probably seek to integrate some of these elements into your regulations as feasible without making it prohibitive to develop anything, because that works against our interests in having housing developed and having viable commercial zones. So I think this ties into everything, it's not just one thing, and we'll just approach it in that way. I already talked about bike and ped infrastructure as part of site design, like requiring bicycle parking, which is incredibly inexpensive to do. You've got the canal trail that goes right through here. It really should be a priority for this community, and so we should have just very basic requirements associated with that. Next is your cluster zone regs. So you have these residential cluster zones, village cluster zones, and they are these floating zones that can be, so you provide a set of regulations for a zone. You just describe a zone that exists in some way in theory. I think you only have one of these zones that's actually been landed on the map, rezoned. But those cluster zone regulations look a lot in their purpose and intended function, a lot like your housing strategy floating zone, which is another type of floating zone. So you have these different mechanisms that seemingly are trying to do the same thing, but describe very different procedures for their adoption and different types of requirements. So I don't know that you still need the cluster zones. I think a lot of that could be achieved through your housing strategy floating zone, which appears to be a kind of a stronger mechanism. And so I wonder if you.
And more recently adopted.
Is the
More
housing?
recently
And more recently adopted.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's the newer one,
Right,
right?
Yes.
right, I would agree with that.
Did that replace the workforce housing overlay zone?
It did,
Yeah.
That's-
it did.
That makes sense.
You have this long list of zones that there's tremendous amount of redundancy, and it really overcomplicates things, and there's a lot of inconsistency between them.
We'd like to keep people guessing.
Yeah, apparently. Okay, let's take a look at what that looks like. And so when we come back to you with a recommendation like that, we basically would describe exactly how the regulations would need to be changed. In this case, where you were just taking pages out. But we look for what are the implications of that across the regulations. And are there any opportunities lost? Is there something that was enabled through the cluster zones that is not enabled through the housing strategy floating zone? And if that's something you prefer to retain, and if so, what we would then do would be to amend the housing strategy floating zone to do some of those things that the cluster zones were doing. So we're really kind of not just throwing something out, but almost kind of merging it into together. So we need to dive into that, but we could come back to you with some recommendations to that effect. And the last one is similar. It's your professional office zone. It's this tiny little niche zone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it
Create four more.
should be a business zone, should allow for a wider range of uses.
Yeah, what was that application?
Is that the yoga studio thing?
Yeah, South School.
Right,
Yeah.
so that's when she
Yeah.
wanted
It
to.
goes to the zoning commission on June 1.
Yeah, I saw it on their agenda.
Yeah.
Okay. So that,
But
I
it
mean,
makes
that's.
sense, what she was at, yeah.
100%.
That's an
Yeah.
example
No, I
of when
just
they
said it
said
made
those
sense.
special regs that we knew were gonna get approved anyway.
Well, right, but this is gonna take however long and she wants to get going.
Right,
And there's only a few B zones
Yeah,
left.
there's 3 or 4
yeah, it
examples.
was small.
Yeah.
So we got through quite a bit. There's obviously, I just said about everything I would do. So we certainly have a lot of work coming out of this meeting. And truth be told, we have been in a little bit of a holding pattern since our workshop because we really could only go so far with updating the zoning regulations before we really need to bring these issues to you and get some direction. And now that we've got quite a bit of direction, actually. We could really dive back into it. So there's one more item, I'll try to get through it quickly, and I talked about it earlier, it's the Public Act 25-1.
Oh, yeah.
It was House Bill 8002, which was signed by the governor on Wednesday, late in the day before Thanksgiving.
Thank
So, I mean, this is very well-intended legislation that was not well executed. And I happen to be working with 13 communities in the River Cog region, just like East Haddam and Old Lyme and all those towns, to update their zoning regulations to be compliant with what's being required of this. And these are pretty rural communities that, this is very concerning to them, even though they're not great. Most of them, with the exception like Old Saybrook and Clinton, aren't great candidates for new development. So I don't know how, what the implications are for them, but we're working with them to ensure their zoning regulations are respond to what's being allowed here. So I'll walk you through what's being allowed and how we need to address it. So the Public Act, there are two pieces of it. Well, there are a lot of pieces of the Public Act, many sections that deal mostly with housing issues. And it's all over the place. Some of it with 830G and some, it covers a lot of ground. There are two zoning related pieces that are compulsory, like you don't have a choice, but you're gonna have to allow these things, or you're gonna have to change your zoning regulation to be consistent. There's the middle housing piece requirement, and there's some changes to your parking regulations. I'll go through those one by one. This is the middle housing piece. So the language in red, that's my emphasis. All of this is the language from the Act. The most important piece of this is, as of July 1st this year, your zoning regulations have to allow for the development of transit community middle housing or mixed-use development on any lot that is zoned for commercial or mixed use by summary review approval. So they threw a bunch of terms at us, and I'll walk you through those terms. Transit community middle housing. It's a really unfortunate term because this legislation is applicable to all 169 towns. Sherman, Connecticut doesn't have transit, but it applies there. Transit community middle housing just means multifamily 2 to 9 unit. That's what it is. So I'll just call it middle housing. It's multifamily 2 to 9 units. So you have to allow that, or you have to allow mixed-use development. And mixed-use development is defined in statute as residential and a non-residential use in the same building. And in the communities where we're working, where we're allowing mixed use as a means of complying, we're doing the same unit range, 2 to 9 unit, like the middle housing. So you have to allow either of those in all of your commercial or mixed-use zones.
You're saying you have to allow either or both?
Either, and we could talk about this for an hour, right?
We could, theoretically, we could be like, we don't want mixed use, we want only residential, or
Yeah.
we could say,
Yes.
in this,
Yeah.
by location, we could be like,
So-
we only want a mixed use, you can't build the other thing only a mixed use, but we have to allow one or the other.
So George was calling attention to a very important point of discussion and a debate surrounding this issue and the use of the word or. And the debate has been, we've got a land use attorney on our team here in Simsbury. I've certainly discussed it with him and some other land use attorneys in other communities. The debate has been, what does or mean? Does or mean or does or mean and?
Yeah.
And the history of this in the legislation is when this first surfaced at the beginning of legislative session in 2025 as part of House Bill 5002, it was an and. And then when it got its second life in the special session in the fall, it got changed to an or. And it got changed to an or, as I understand it to be, of course was not in the room for any of this. The Connecticut Conference of Municipalities was just pushing back really hard on this. And it's my understanding they lobbied for that to be an or. to give communities the option of complying through allowing either purely residential form or requiring it to be mixed use. There are differing opinions on this, though. Some town attorneys are taking a very conservative approach, and they believe or means and. And they say, we really should allow both. We don't run afoul of this. And other attorneys I met with said, no, or means or. And there's actually case law in Connecticut surrounding the use of or in legislation. In the case law, and it's actually in the criminal case law, has decided in the two cases I reviewed that or means or. Right.
That means
Interesting, especially whereas they changed it.
That's what
from
the
hand-
definition of is.
I was just thinking.
Additionally, there was a bill that got voted out of the House, went over to the Senate, didn't get called to the floor for a vote before the term, the session expired this past May, early May. The bill 5362, House Bill, would have changed or to and.
So it was and, it went to or, and now it's being
And the
considered.
legislature tried to have one more crack at it.
about and.
And it also would have pushed out the effective date to next July 1st of next year. And then it further would have specified that the mixed-use component was also intended to be 2 to 9 units, which they should have done from the beginning. It didn't get out of the Senate, so it didn't become law, and it could be revisited. But it's very clear that the legislature seemed to think that, oh, oops, or means or, and we actually want communities to allow either form or both forms. And so we should change this to and to make that exceedingly clear. Otherwise, or could be interpreted to mean or. So it's some of the communities in which I'm working, as I mentioned, I'm working through Lower Connecticut River Council of Governments with their communities. Some town attorneys are saying, no, let's just do this now and allow both forms because eventually they probably will come back in a session. They'll eventually change it to and then we'll have to do it then anyway. And so we're following communities' lead on that, but we're making them aware of what we believe to be the options in front of them. And I would put that in front of you as well. I'm not pushing you in one direction or another. I want to make you aware of the context surrounding its use.
This is
And-
only in properties already zoned for.
So, well, here's another issue. There's another very problematic issue with the wording. It's for any lot zoned for commercial or mixed use.
Yeah.
Well, as you're probably aware, a lot of residential zones will allow commercial uses, like a farm or a daycare center, or sometimes a veterinarian clinic, or these very narrow range of commercial uses. Well, are we to interpret this language to mean that on those lots in residential zones, you could redevelop to do middle housing?
It's not a commercial zone.
But no, it doesn't say any lot currently used for commercial or mixed use, it says any lot zoned for. So any lot in a residential zone, if some form of commercial is allowed on that lot, if you were to interpret this as strictly written,
The way it's written, it says zone for commercial.
zone for, exactly.
What's the definition of a commercial zone?
Well, so commercial zone is more of a kind of a broadly understood term with respect to statute and case law. And we're kind of working our way through that right now with these other communities that I talked about. So let me jump ahead to the interpretation. Because of the language here, the general consensus has been to interpret that this legislation is applicable to commercial and mixed-use zones. Because
Districts NPO here.
because there is another aspect of legislation that gives you, says that you may allow transit community middle housing in your residential zones, which you could do right now. You didn't need the state's permission to do that. But they give you points towards like a housing moratorium. If you do that, you get extra points. So it's like an incentive-based thing. So clearly they saw, again, they didn't say residential zones. They said on any lot zone for residential use. So clearly they saw residential zones as one thing, commercial mixed-use zones as another. So that's where the lines are being drawn. So we're interpreting this to mean that you have to allow either or both middle housing, mixed-use development in all of your commercial or mixed-use zones, but not industrial. There was a separate piece of legislation that would have expanded this to industrially zoned properties, and that didn't even.
Didn't get out of committee.
Yeah, I didn't make it out of committee. If it did, it didn't go to the floor for a vote in either chamber. So that didn't go anywhere, and it likely won't. That was kind of a bridge too far. So what we need to do here in Simsbury is we need in all of your, and this is not so much an issue for Simsbury Town Center zone, because of, its whole intention is mixed use. But for your other zones, we have to allow middle housing or mixed use, and we could decide later what that needs to be. And I would suggest you actually consult with the town attorney on it as well for their opinion in case they have an opinion. But that's one thing we have to do.
Are we allowed to regulate what that is within these
Yes.
guidelines? So can we
Yes.
say, for example, that in certain areas, we only want duplexes, or we only want cottage clusters, or we only want townhouses,
You
or?
can't be that specific.
Okay.
So
They're allowed to do
it-
any of those things?
It has to be in the communities I'm working with, where we are, the communities that are interpret or to mean or, we're allowing them to pick and choose between mixed use, you allow it, mixed use, and the form that usually takes is, you have the non-residential use on the ground floor, residential has to be on upper floors.
Yeah, I like that
Period.
it's in the same building.
Period.
That is what it is.
And then where they allow the middle housing piece, it has to be any form.
That's listed.
2-family, 3-family, 4, 5, an apartment building, 9 connected townhouses, and even cottage clusters. And cottage clusters are defined in statute as 4 single-family units, detached dwelling units, surrounding a common open space, a minimum of 4 per acre. So you have to allow that as well. You have to allow like a little mini
Detached.
subdivision.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we don't have to allow huge apartment complexes in those
No,
areas?
no.
2 to 9. 2 to 9 units.
No, up to 9.
That's
So
the
now here.
window.
Oh, not more than 9,
So
I'm sorry, I
here's
saw 2
some
to
of
9.
the, here's some of the other waters, well, let me go ahead, there, and I'll get in, talk about interpretation of all this. So summary review is, again, it's a really unfortunate term, because within statute, we have all this site plan, these great site plan statutes, and a ton of case law on site plan applications and approvals, and now they throw us this new term that actually looks a lot like as of right, a hybrid of between as of right approval and a site plan approval. But what it is not is it is not a special exception. You cannot require a special exception for any of this, and you cannot have a public hearing. And your criteria, you can't have a big page-long list of criteria to consider. Your criteria is limited to determination of public health and safety. That's it. That's narrow. Everything else has to be, does it comply with the zoning regulations, yes or no?
Isn't that just as of right?
No, because as of right, you can't have there isn't a separate criteria that you can apply to as of right. But if you look at the definition of this and as of right in statute, it's almost exactly the same, except they add the caveat of public health and safety as a basis for denial. So you can kind of have these broader concepts that if you can demonstrate an adverse substantial public health or safety impact, it can be a basis for denial, which is different from as of right.
Right, but that's like 830G is, right? It's the same
A
thing.
little bit, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I always thought as of right also included that too.
It's sort of a confusing title. Couldn't it just be called middle housing?
Yes. So in the communities where we're working, that's what we're calling it. We're just calling it middle housing, and then
I mean, what is the main definition of transit community?
That's
again, this is the
in the statute.
legislation in the statute.
it's
Right.
so look,
Legislator.
I worked on this legislation for years. I not the year it passed, but I worked on this exact legislation for several years. It's left over from an older version of the bill where it was designed around transit communities.
Oh, okay.
Frankly, a better version of the bill before CCM
I mean,
got-
it had
it got
to do with
fingers in it
public
and started
transportation.
messing with it, but
Well, yeah, back
it
in
had
the
to be
day,
built
that's
around
what it
public
was,
transportation. It was this
transit-oriented
whole thing. It was
development.
transit-oriented development. That's all. It's all it
So So-
was, the CCM got their fingers in it, and there were a lot of
Yeah.
things that happened
So I
behind the
think we
scenes.
all understand what's being required, right? The basics. You have to allow 2 to 9 unit multifamily or mixed-use development in your business and mixed-use zones. And you can't require a special exception or a public hearing for it. Yeah. Okay. Now, there's a lot of assumptions we have to make for informed judgments. First of all, that your industrial zones are exempted, and this is pretty solid ground now, just in the past couple of months, that's really firmed up,
How do we know
particularly
that
with the bill that did not see the light of day.
No
So,
housing advocate would that.
That's pretty solid, not a lot of debate on that. We talked about the mixed use versus the multifamily form already. Mixed use development, we've seen, it looks like we're okay to apply the same 2 to 9 unit limit on that based upon what had been proposed in legislation. Next one's important. Both transit community, middle housing, and mixed use development are described and defined as a building. So as long as you allow one building, you're in compliance, which isn't to say that you have to allow 5 9-unit structures on a single lot, assuming they fit and they meet all your setback requirements. You could limit it to 1 structure per lot through a summer review equivalent approval.
One structure of 9 units or
Yeah,
less.
yeah.
2 to 9.
But wouldn't that violate allowance of cottage clusters?
With exception, you would create the exception, you would define a cottage cluster as a singular use. So you have to do a little bit more work than that, and that's a very good point.
Is
Outside
there
of that,
anything to do with being affordable?
well, this is a good question. The state does not require any of this to be affordable. It's not like an 830G project. But they allow you to impose affordability requirements.
I see.
So you can impose. The general counsel we're giving to people is if you do provide an affordability requirement, just make sure it's consistent with other affordability requirements. It's not excessively prohibitive, because then it becomes a de facto prohibition.
It would not apply to our current affordability component since we require a minimum, we
Above
only
10.
applied at 10 or more.
It's 10, that's what it is.
Right, so you could set a throat lower, and some communities were requiring that 1 out of every 3 or 4 units be made affordable, and you could set the percentages and the years, set it 30 years or whatever it may be.
Sure, but we can get moratorium points for it anyway.
So so if you want moratorium points, right,
Only
you set it 30,
residential.
30, 80. Right, well, the years don't really matter, you wanna get as many years as possible. What matters is 30, 80. It's 80% AMI and 30% affordability, and that then qualifies. And then you require it to be deed restricted for a specified period of time.
Okay. But this doesn't apply to a moratorium unless we provide a deed restriction.
Correct. You have to write in the affordability requirements. Middle housing by itself does not get you any
Does not get you
moratorium
anywhere.
rights,
Even
because
if it's in residential.
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
The individual units have to be restricted for those to qualify.
It go towards our 10%, but
Yeah.
it doesn't go towards the moratorium points.
But we can be super restrictive in our regulations to require the affordability and deed restriction.
You can, I would just say,
And comply.
I would caution you to
Yeah.
not to require like 50% or 100% be
It's
affordable.
not gonna.
I don't think you can apply to this, because
Sounds
it's
like
not
a
summary
loophole
review.
we should take advantage of.
What
Well,
It's
about,
not.
You can't, there's consensus that you can have an affordability requirement.
okay, so you were
But
talking.
the general counsel that I've been provided with is that to ensure that if you do have affordability requirements for other forms of development in town, that it be consistent with what you apply to other forms, so it doesn't appear as being biased against this type of housing.
Well, to do that, we'd have to lower our number on the other ones.
You're right. Which,
It's fine, yeah.
What do you mean?
I have a,
What's,
Well,
right now, the
because it's
minimum
10.
is 10,
Yeah.
and this
Goes
is,
to 9.
max is 9,
So if you get 1.
or you get 0.
we get 0 unless they put more than 1 9-unit, like if they
Right.
put 2 9-units, it would still,
so
it would
my
apply.
question is, if you were trying to say that you could limit it to 1 9-unit building, would we put that in, you're saying we would put that in the regulation that they can only build 1? But like, what if the lot was big enough for 2?
Well, they
But what if you didn't want 10? Is there like a way to
Well,
maybe
yeah,
only want
well,
one
you could
sometimes.
allow, what you could do is you could limit for the summary review type of approval, you could limit that to one principal structure.
Okay,
And if the lot's big enough, then they could do additional structures through a special exception.
okay,
But you're
Okay,
only
that makes
required
sense.
to allow one through this summary review type of equivalent.
alright, that makes sense, I
Are
would
you
be in
satisfied?
favor of that.
Which we would,
Yeah.
I would be in favor
Yeah,
of that.
so while
But changing the.
that is possible, I don't know that that is actually good policy. If the space could have two, they should have two.
Maybe not, maybe it's not appropriate to have two just cause you could have two.
Well, according to what? Appropriate based on our setback requirements, based on health and safety, right? I mean, there are the other things that they'd have to abide by.
Based on lots of things.
We're talking about your commercial zones as well.
Right.
I mean, that is what we're talking about.
Be a proposal for a big commercial on the first floor and
Right, in which case.
9 units upstairs.
And that
I'll tell you what,
That would be.
I could use a bathroom break.
um,
I don't wanna rush through this because I have to go to the restroom.
Yeah.
It's
I'm ready
down
for
the hall.
adjournment.
Why don't you, yeah,
Can I,
why don't you talk about that just for a couple of minutes? Come back, give me give me a minute, come back,
And then we'll wrap up.
talk about a little more, and then I wanna move on to the parking implications of this, which are really important.
Can we wrap by 9:30?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think-
I was
think
gonna
so.
ask if I
That's
could
what-
just excuse myself,
Yes.
but we can do 9:30, that's.
Yeah,
That's what he
it's
was-
gonna drag on.
Are we writing the whole
Yeah.
code?
So
so,
commercial,
Right, not tonight, right?
Not tonight.
no.
Feels
So
like it.
commercial zones are what,
B1, B2, B3, PO,
yeah,
What is PO?
for official office.
which we would be eliminating anyway.
Which we probably would recommend that as well.
right, so it's basically.
Business.
My recommendation, we just do and.
Yeah.
Just do and, one, for two reasons. One, in my opinion, it's much better policy. And two, it will be the policy of the state probably next year.
Oh, Tucker, okay. On point number 2, I agree. Point number 1, all the mixed-use developments we have in town, they're all coming back, we can't find mixed
I
use.
know.
Yeah,
That's
Not
because,
all, okay.
that's because, well, there's reasons for that, because what we say is mixed use, because what our definition of mixed use is not what they're doing for mixed use. We're saying there has to be some commercial on the lot itself. This is saying it has to be within the building.
well, we
It's gonna be-
tried
if
to do
that
that
was-
and they
if-
said it wasn't possible.
Yeah,
The
we
developers,
did.
we asked them to do
Did-
that.
Do we require
We didn't
on Hartford
require it,
South,
but we
for
asked.
instance, that they be part of the same building
We
for mixed
asked.
use?
Yeah, that was one of we
Yes.
raised that as an issue and they said they couldn't do it.
Right, but it's not a requirement within that
I mean, it was
code.
within the intent of that code for sure.
Well, sure, but this is the requirement in the code, like no ifs, ands, or buts. If you wanna do mixed use,
No,
And
the
you must
code
do
allowed
mixed
that
use.
flexibility that you didn't have to do it that
And
way.
part of me wants to say sometimes I wanna say, yeah, damn right, you have to do it that way. You don't get to build little
This is-
cottages in that location, you've gotta put the mixed use in. So instead of saying and, I think it's or, and we decide until someone tells us otherwise.
I think and is better.
That's my
So
opinion.
So what's the and or? It
the
makes-
and is saying that it's both. It is both mixed use and available for a 9-unit or for whatever
Strictly
cottage
But
close
if
to
it's
the
like
Avenue.
right in, like it was downtown,
Or or the.
In other words, in the
Instead.
commercial zone, you're allowed to
Right.
now do this for strictly residential.
Yeah,
Or it can be mixed use.
right, but I think sometimes we might wanna
I say
compel
it's-
it to be mixed use in certain areas, for example, or compel it
Okay,
to be
but-
residential.
but then
But see,
mixed
then
use,
there's
That's
the
the or.
marketing.
so then
you know.
how big can the residential portion of it be if it has to
It
be
can
mixed
be
use?
between 2 and 9
Well,
units.
then we're saying the same thing.
But I might say on a different situation, you can't do 2 and 9 units, you've gotta do commercial below, 9 units in the same building, has to be, you have to have
That's why it's
that.
From a land use perspective
Yeah.
and for land use, this parcel might be better served, in our opinion,
Yeah,
as a mixed use
and this one might
entity
be
and not-
better as,
not
Doesn't
9
that-
townhouses.
Isn't that why you say and not or?
no, the and means they could do either
No,
one, and you don't have a
State
choice.
legislation says it's not by definition.
I think and.
But-
Right, but if you're
Or it
saying,
says
if you're
you
saying
can say one or
not
the other.
every property within the
Required.
zone gets this treatment, just this one and that one, isn't that spot zoning?
Yeah, so,
But you can make that recommendation, but they can say, sorry, we're still not gonna do it.
Not if you say or.
No, because
They
that person
could,
can,
because they
well,
could say, we're not gonna do it.
so maybe I'm
we wanna
getting
do it
into,
now.
maybe I'm not,
No,
And
it's
you
not a
come
choice.
back-
No, he said that we could decide as a community that we want it to be mixed use, and as long as we allow one
you
or
could
the
make
other.
them all mixed use, you could say that you,
Right.
I agree.
the building has to be
Yes.
mixed use across the board.
And
I
they
think you
are
run the
allowed
risk
to
of
do
nobody
the
building anything.
residential one.
Right, so I agree.
Well, and that may be
saying
the
the
policy
same thing.
decision
I think
too,
we're saying
which will
the
be
same
fixed
thing.
by the legislature.
I don't think you are
next year.
saying the same thing.
I think so.
I think that I think that what we do with this is we say, look, if you're putting stuff in here, it's gonna be mixed use. And the 9 cluster, whatever cottage.
No, because
what
that
have you.
means they can do whichever they choose and we want to choose. We want to have a
We say
say.
you do both, you have to do both.
No,
On the
it's
same lot?
always,
Same lot?
it's always.
That's what mixed use
no,
is.
No,
I
it's
guess I don't
always,
understand.
so, because the,
We're finished by 9:30, we're not gonna
Alright, so the
resolve this
choice-
this evening,
well, the
so
choice is always
I say let's just go on to the next
one,
topic.
it's either all residential or
Can we
mixed
table
use.
this? You know
Yeah,
what, you
let's
guys
table
need
it.
to
Let's go on to the
consider,
next
yeah, because I think,
We can, there's no shortage of other work.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
I
think
mean,
we're
we're
saying-
not,
I
we're
think
not
we
gonna
need to
resolve this
definitely
tonight.
come back and revisit, but,
All right,
yeah.
so let's,
Okay,
you,
let's-
I think you have your heads wrapped around what some of the possibilities are, right? And I'll leave you with these are just some of the other basics, like you can in fact, you can apply all the regulations that you apply to any other form of development. This type of development does not get a free pass. It's not like 830G where it can just completely bypass your zoning regulations. You could still require certain type of site design and you can have
Setbacks,
standard.
impervious surface,
All of
height,
that is still,
blah, blah, blah.
all of that's still applicable, okay?
Right.
But not the density.
Here's the next part of
Yeah,
it.
right.
Well, the
Not
density
the
is,
density, it's
The
not-
density's
not
2 to 9.
building,
that
2 to
is the
9.
density, right.
Right, that's what
It's-
he's
it's-
saying.
But we don't know how
yes.
big that lot is.
Well, they can only put so much into single lot,
Right.
it doesn't matter.
They can do the rest as special exception.
We're not gonna, we'll
As
see.
long as it fits on the lot, as long as they're,
Right,
as long as they are within the setbacks and they don't exceed any coverage limits, as long as they can fit it, they can do it,
right.
right? It's,
And they're doing the
so,
setbacks
so
from
there,
the
a
business,
developer isn't entitled to 9 units
Yeah.
regardless of what your zoning regulations are. Like, you don't have to give them a free pass on setbacks because they can't fit 9
Right.
units
It
in.
has to fit.
Right,
They're still bound by your zoning regulations. It's just that you have to allow,
That
or where the
use.
conditions support it, you have to allow up to 9 units.
Right.
The second part of this that really, it does tie into, but it's not limited to the middle housing discussion, are residential parking requirements. So the state is essentially saying you can no longer have a minimum parking requirement for any form of residential development with 16 or fewer dwelling units.
Right.
So we're not talking about just middle housing anymore. We're talking about any type of residential development with 16 or fewer units. Single family, duplexes, townhouses, condos, apartment buildings, mixed use. If that project, that lot has 16 or fewer units, their parking requirement is 0.
Jesus Christ.
Where would
Yeah,
they,
so
like,
you
what
should
if that's
use it
a
for-
issue?
Pending health and safety.
It's fine.
Yes.
Right, but what
So
if there's
there-
no
there's-
street parking?
So there,
Then they
It
can't
means
do it.
anywhere.
so first, I think we have to appreciate the realities of this,
That means
right?
I'm hopping it up.
No, it doesn't.
The market demands off-street parking, so developers want to build off-street parking because they have a hard time selling or renting units
Yeah.
that lack. Developers additionally have a hard time getting financing if they can't prove that they're gonna meet the parking demand, because the
Right.
financiers are concerned about those units being sold or rented. So there's some basic realities, but this is really, it is removing towns and their zoning regulations from establishing minimum requirements regardless. So the requirement is 0 unless, and this is similar to the summer review criteria, unless there's a demonstrated substantial adverse impact to public health or safety created by the amount or lack of off-street parking provided by
Right.
developer, okay? So now this applies everywhere unless you create something called a conservation and traffic mitigation district. It has nothing to do with conservation as we understand it. It has really very little to do with
Sure.
traffic. So the communities where we are establishing them, we're calling them parking management districts, and we're just referring back to that section of statute.
So with that, can we say no more street parking in Simsbury?
So you can do that anywhere as it is. You don't need to do that through your zoning. That could be a town ordinance regarding where you allow on-street
But
parking.
does
where you
that
don't.
create the public safety?
So as I mentioned, there are some exceptions. If you create one of these districts, within that district, you can continue to require parking for any scale of residential development. Okay? You can also, I've been talking about 16 or fewer units. You can also still require parking for any development with 17 or more units. But the state is setting the ratio. You can't require more than 1 unit per studio and 1 bedroom to two spaces, or 1 space per studio or 1 bedroom unit, and 2 spaces for 2 bedroom or more. That's the most you can require. The state is setting a cap on that.
Well, that's typical anyway.
Yeah, but you need, what about like guests and
So,
stuff?
I mean, it's
You need a low percentage, yeah.
It's fairly consistent with most communities that, the numbers kind of vary. Sometimes it's space and a half, and sometimes it's 2 spaces across the board. They don't care how many bedrooms. The numbers are pretty good. So those numbers are okay. So 17 or more units, that applies. You can apply that throughout the town, fine. But you can create up to 2 conservation traffic mitigation districts, and each one can be up to 4% of your land area. And they can be contiguous, they can be touching, not merged, but contiguous. And within that area, you can continue to require parking for any scale of development at the ratio I just mentioned. Okay?
So we're talking over 16 units.
No, under.
Between 1 and 16.
I'll skip ahead to the good part.
So if you had like one of those mixed use developments we just talked about,
Yeah.
would there be parking required for the mixed use portion but not the residential portion, or no parking required for any of it?
The non-residential, you can continue to require parking for that square footage as you require it for whatever the use is, whether it's retail or restaurant.
Yeah, okay, that makes
The
sense.
dwelling units, unless that mixed-use building or middle housing building
More than
is
16.
in one of these districts, it would have 0
Okay.
off-street parking
Yeah.
requirement.
Okay.
Okay, so this is compounded. Not only do we have middle housing,
Yeah.
they're taking
This
away
would
the-
apply to
And
it.
it's intended to help enable the development of housing and have parking be less of a barrier.
What's the minimum geography of a district?
No minimum, could
The
be a
maximum.
single lot. The
Or it
max,
could be the entire town.
But it can only, no, it has to be 4%, 4%.
the maximum is 4% of your land
You said
area.
4%.
8% total because it's 2 that could be up to 4% each.
It wouldn't even cover downtown, would it?
Our heads
So
would
yeah, it
explode
needs to
trying to
cover
do
down.
Or what?
that. Our heads would explode trying to do that.
8% total.
It's just important to remember that people are trying to make money that's on these
Nobody's not.
developments.
They're
If
gonna
no
pay
one
more.
is, if
Yeah,
no
I
one
mean, the
can park
market's-
at your development,
Yeah.
then you're not gonna build it in the first place.
Yeah.
Why would you do it?
We have drafted some of these districts, and I think gerrymandering is the term I would use. Right, because we're just trying to be for the communities that are very concerned about this as an issue, we try to maximize the value of that district to the greatest extent possible, which doesn't just mean what is 4% of your land area, but how can we draw this to capture all the area that you're concerned about development not providing enough parking. And that means you exclude town-owned lots to the greatest extent possible. You exclude highway and rail right-of-way as best you can draw it. You definitely exclude any industrial zones because they don't have residential development. You try to capture those commercial zones where middle housing is going to be allowed, the higher density residential zones. And you can draw something that maximizes the value quite a bit, and it's pretty funky shape. It's not a circle on the map. And that's okay because it's within the parameters of what's allowed.
So if we have, in the north end of town, you have Harvest Cafe and some other shops that's single story. So if you wanted to add a story on top of that building,
Great question. Yes,
housing,
Yeah.
go for it.
that
Yes.
could fit this because
That-
it's commercially zoned.
that would be-
Flexible
That's-
structurally, but.
No, but I mean, as a
Well,
concept.
if you allowed it as mixed use.
That's a
Well,
great
so,
example,
wait, yeah,
yes.
but in other words, this is letting you do that
Right,
because it's commercially zoned.
Yes,
You're creating mixed use.
yes.
You're adding a
Correct.
story above for apartments
Yes.
over
And
existing.
guess what? Guess what? You don't have to provide more parking.
To nine.
And like they already have park.
But if
And you
you
don't have to,
said,
you don't have to add more.
So, right, so that is
but
a.
if you said
Exact-
and in that regulation instead of or, then you could tear that down and only put residential and lose your commercial.
9
Right?
units, 9 units.
9 units, but you
Is
could
that-
have to, but you could lose commercial if you said and instead of or.
Sure.
If it went up for sale and somebody bought it, yes.
that's not my understanding of the and or dichotomy, but I agree with what you're saying, you wouldn't want that to happen.
No.
You wanna set your zoning to where it is mixed use.
Okay, we got our heads more or less wrapped around, there's the middle housing and the parking piece. So, this is work we have to do, the only choice here is whether or not we create any districts. And I could certainly come back to you with some ideas on the map that are within 4%, if you're interested in considering it.
It's not a huge deal.
It's not.
But if, by example, we're working with Manchester right now, and they said, you know what, we're not worried about this, don't worry about that piece of it. Let's just get all the parking standards, what we're being required to allow. And there's one component I skipped over. You have to allow a developer to do their own parking needs assessment. And if their parking needs assessment says they need less parking than 1 per studio and 1 bedroom and 2 per 2-bedroom plus, you have to allow the lesser amount.
Sure.
So we need to write that in as an alternative as well. You have
Based
to.
on their
Their
paying
assessment.
somebody else to
The
see.
state provided a short list of criteria. We're adding to that, we're requiring that in a lot of the communities we're working, we're requiring it to be conducted by a licensed transportation engineer and that it be based upon certain set of standards.
Okay.
So I don't.
I don't think we've had an
remember this, but-
application for 16 or fewer residential units in a decade.
Yeah.
Right,
That's what I'm getting to, I mean, look, if you don't want the big apartment buildings, fill the space with the middle housing.
yeah.
Meet the housing needs like that, don't meet it with the big ones.
Well, so if the table 570, is it? The
Yes.
Asian restaurant, that's proposing a new building, that's commercial downstairs and 2 apartments upstairs, I think. Does
Yes,
that fit this?
yes.
Yes.
And they don't have to add any more parking.
So then they,
They've
Though
been
they
through a site plan.
probably wouldn't need it at that
Yeah,
point.
probably
because
don't.
there's-
Yeah,
it's overparked, that's it.
It's been approved,
which is-
I know, but the
But that
point
would
is,
apply, yeah.
Yes, because it
That could
would,
apply.
To do that.
it would be 2 to 9, yes, so it would,
Yes.
it would.
Maybe they need a better menu.
Yes, all right,
Well,
so. and-
Okay, so where do we go from here?
Fill
Yes,
up
thank
that
you, so
line.
we're gonna, so then we're gonna, 5 minutes.
So I have a big list of
2
things
over.
that for us that my team can move on to immediately. And with a lot of work to do, we do meet with staff regularly, just check in on progress and get their feedback on the direction of things. So we have a lot of work to do, I think, before we're prepared to come back to you again. And so our next meeting would be what we're calling our 50% progress meeting. And as of now, I see us on the screen.
I'm sorry, hang on. I didn't.
I think Shannon abandoned us.
She did a while ago.
Right.
I'm sure she.
Yeah, she's staying up late.
So
She went to sleep because she's sick.
So there we are at 25% at the middle green line. We anticipate end of July maybe, first week of August, I don't know what summer plans and schedules look like. But we anticipate coming back to you then with our 50%, at our 50% meeting. In which case we will have had an opportunity to dive into a lot of this. We would have a lot for you to review. So in advance of that meeting, we would provide you with all the text amendments, the recommendations, in whatever format we need to convey that information to you with. And then we'd use that meeting just to review all that and make some decisions about what to include as written, what we might need, what we might want to table. And sometimes we explore these ideas and we just table them, right? And we just leave it for next year, the year before, you just let it simmer for a couple of years. And that's okay too. So we would need to make a lot of decisions at that meeting, because then we really want to start integrating that into the draft zoning regulations we produce. What we're working towards is final adoption of everything by March of 2027. That's what we're working towards. So we've got a lot of work to get done between now and then, but I actually feel pretty comfortable with that schedule, assuming we get these meetings scheduled.
Would that be with us again, or just zoning?
No, just zoning. Zoning, we would probably circle back to
Yeah, we
planning,
wanna
in the
come-
fall, probably.
Okay.
Yeah,
Probably.
exactly. And the yellow dot is planning up there.
Oh, okay,
So
thank you.
we want to come, and whether or not that's waits to January or we do that in October instead, I leave it up to all you. We want to come back to planning again once we've had a chance to work with the zoning commission to go over all of this work, to make some decisions and decide what we want to move forward. We definitely want to come back and ensure that planning is on board, understands everything before, far enough in advance of trying to schedule a public hearing for adoption.
So public hearing would be at the tail end of this whole thing?
Yeah, we're gonna have, at least a month before the public hearing. It really needs to be pencils down. We need to send it to CROG for referral.
Yeah, we'll release it to the public for at least
Make it
30
available to the
30
public.
45 days.
We wanna be as transparent as possible. We don't need to be hasty with any of this work. I think this affords us plenty of time to do the work, but there is a lot of work to do.
So with the July 1st, 2026 implementation of,
Right. We won't have this adopted by then, but
so how is that gonna be handled with applicants?
yeah. That's a very good question. I think a minority of the communities in Connecticut will have something on the books by July 1st. If you did have an applicant come forward, you essentially have to allow a project that meets the requirements of statute. If there's a real concern about having any sort of gap, what we could do is we could draft just a one-page amendment, and you treat it as an addendum to your existing regulations, where you essentially define what these uses are. You say this is allowed in these zones, up to 9 units, one principal structure. You'd also provide a section for your parking to get that compliant, just so you have something on the books to follow, and you're not making it up as you go. I think the disadvantage of not having something in place is that it really puts the developer in the driver's seat. They're interpreting the statute in their favor, and their lawyer is, and they're telling you how it's supposed to work, and you're in a reactive position. And even though I think it's all very well-intended development, housing's a good thing, and the scale we're talking about is not too bad. I think realistically, as George mentioned, I haven't seen it less than 16 unit development in forever. So I don't expect, as of July 1st, he's gonna have a line out at his door. But I do think if there's a concern about that, we could draft something on an interim basis for the zoning commission to adopt. And you don't have to amend your existing regs and change sections and move pages. You just stick it at the back, and that's your bridge. Until we get this more comprehensively written into your new regulations. And I'd be happy to do that.
Now, let me and George discuss that, and we'll get back to you on that. Whether
Sure.
We need you to do anything before then.
Sure, and yeah, I'd be happy to provide that for you. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I appreciate everyone's input, and it was we had a great discussion tonight.
Now, let's stay along.
It was a long evening.
And I'm like, where am I?
For over 40 years, SCM has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education, and live broadcasts.
SEM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings, and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SEM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions, and it's no secret People have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SEM receives less revenue.
Even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open.
Continues to educate our youth and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SEM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us.
Join us in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
For generations to come.
Visit our website
Or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
Counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media.
where your town
Your schools and
And your government
come together.